and welcome to the September 18th edition of the Bubb Report. Last week, the government of Grenada confirmed that the cabinet approved a series of measures to mitigate against the continued fallout of the heightened increases in energy prices, the staggering rate at which freight continues to increase, and the impact that these external factors are having on the cost of living for Grenadian citizens. Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell confirmed these measures at the government's post-cabinet press briefing.
Cabinet conference, we indicated that we were taking the submission to cabinet for approval to cap the freight rates at 2019 for a period of 6 months. I am happy to report that cabinet has in fact approved the submission, and so effective as of the 1st of October 2020 for a period of 6 months in the first instance, freight rates on goods being imported into Grenada will be capped and calculated at the freight rates which existed in 2019. The Ministry of Finance and the Customs Department will sensitize members of the public, importers, brokers, etc. as to what is required to be done administratively to facilitate the conversion of the freight rates.
The government intends to freeze freight rates back to the 2019 level, starting in October 2022, with the hope that cost savings will be passed on to the consumer. They would also remove the gas and diesel ceiling announced by the previous administration in the 2022 budget, as well as remove the 25% in non-fuel charges on electricity bills, which are already astronomically high for the consumer. Inflation in Latin America and the Caribbean more than doubled between the end of 2020 and the end of 2021 to 6.6%. The United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean projects that consumer prices will rise to a whopping 8.1% during the next 12 months, which has prompted governments such as Grenada's to act. The opposition New National Party also responded to these measures at a press conference in St. George's last week, calling them too extreme and too short-sighted, while also warning the Grenadian public that its worst days are yet ahead of them.
That we are very concerned and heartened that this is going to create some significant impact for the ordinary people. We do not know how persons are going to deal with this. I'm certain that persons are seeing their bill have been going up for the past couple of months. And the reason for that is because there is no cap on the fuel prices for what Grenada use. And so it means that fuel prices are increasing. And now we are going to add back that 25% on top of that. And I think that is where the worry comes for every household in this country.
This week on our program, we continue our conversation on the impact these measures will have on the economy. Also on the report, we will sit with a panel of journalists from Grenada to dissect and make sense of the big stories which made headlines in the national community over the last 3 months, and preview what the rest of the year would look like as the country barrels towards the end of 2022. The report would also speak with a Martinican journalist about the fallout from Tropical Storm Fiona in the French Windward Islands. We welcome our guests: Caroline Popovich, journalist; entrepreneur and former Senator Christopher Diali; development consultant Dr. Stephen Fletcher; the president of the Media Workers Association of Grenada, Gerard Joseph; and host of The Narrative, Callistra Faria. We thank you for joining us. Viewers and listeners, we welcome you to this Sunday edition of the Bubb Report, and we want to quickly get to our first guest, Caroline Popovic, who will give us an update on Tropical Storm Fiona that did some damage in the French Windward Islands. And I know that Caroline is on a time crunch. You do have to catch a ferry back to Martinique, I believe.
Yes,
so
we were cancelled. Go ahead. Go ahead. I didn't let you finish.
Absolutely. Yes. Your ferry due to the tropical storm. So could you tell us, Caroline, give us an update on the damages that Tropical Storm Fiona was able to do to the French Windward Islands.
In our part of the world, Guadeloupe really got the biggest hit. of all. It passed straight over Guadeloupe, and they got a lot of rain, more than any wind. It was more rain, and it drenched Basse-Terre to the point where the rivers just washed everything away. So most of the damage is water damage, blocked roads, broke bridges, and a gentleman was carried away in his house by the raging waters, and his body was found yesterday in the morning. So there was a victim as a result of its passage over Guadeloupe. Everything was cancelled, inbound, outbound flights, ferries. I mean, our ferry didn't leave on Friday because the storm passed over on Friday night. And Guadeloupeans had a very difficult time of it, you know, from Marie-Galante to Désirade, Les Saintes, and mainly in Basse-Terre, Lower Basse-Terre, which is sort of like near where the hurricane is, Saint-Claude. All of these communities are very badly damaged. And it is for this reason that the French government has declared a state of emergency in these areas so that funds can be released in order to help with the cleanup and putting things back again. So Guadeloupe in the chain of Lesser Antilles got it quite badly. In Dominica, which is where I am, which is where I got stuck because I had come over here for a short vacation from Martinique. Dominica really was spared. And I mean, the irony of it is that Fiona passed on the 5th anniversary of the passage of Hurricane Maria, which absolutely destroyed this island 5 years ago. They were spared. I mean, nothing much happened. Bad seas, a few rock falls and what have you, and some flooding, but no major damage. The airport was closed, I think, on Friday, and obviously the ports, the seaports were closed, which was why I had to stay here. I was supposed to go back to Martinique on Friday. Martinique, no big thing. A bit of flooding, because it's a big storm, so it was covering all of the islands, but Martinique didn't get anything very much. It was really Guadeloupe.
That is what I noticed with that particular storm, just the sheer size of it, but also that it was very slow moving. Usually with storms, it's kind of worrying when it's like that.
Yeah, because Maria didn't move either. Maria just sat over Dominica and just worked its way at a snail's pace from the south to the north. And Fiona arrived quite quickly. I mean, it was moving quite quickly when it arrived. And then when it got here, it just slowed down. And it had a huge southern part, which kind of covered all the islands right the way down to St. Lucia. So it's slowly moving north now. Today, it's a very nice day. I'm up in the hills in Dominica. I don't know if you can see. Typical day.
The nature island is such a beautiful island.
I'm up in the Zion kind of thing. And it's real nice. And it's just very beautiful still. So no trees fell down, nothing. So Fiona gave them a miss in Dominica. And I think that is a very good thing for them, you know.
That is, considering on the anniversary, talk about fate or lack thereof, really.
No, it's Guadeloupe. It's Guadeloupe that's going to need a lot of help, but I mean, they're going to get it, and it's going to be cleaned up. But the particular area that got damaged is a very sensitive area. It's very steep. There's a lot of rivers that tend to overflow and flood. It's a volcanic area, so, you know, there's lots of gullies. And people live on the coastline where all the water just flows right down. It's very beautiful, but it's also a zone that is particularly prone to flooding. And when it comes to hurricanes and these storms, will obviously have problems if the storm passes over.
Talk to us about Basse-Terre. What is the composition of Basse-Terre in terms of population? Is it a densely populated area? What does that look like?
Well, parts of it are, but I mean, the most densely populated areas are sort of like Pointe-à-Pitre, which is the financial capital, you know. Basse-Terre itself is the administrative capital, but not too many people live there. That whole area is kind of dominated by the volcano, obviously, La Soufrière. Then you have places like Bouillante. It's more of a nature-related. People go there to bathe in the waterfalls, to discover the biosphere, to climb the mountain, to go diving. It's not the most densely populated areas. The most densely populated areas are on the other side, where you have all the beautiful beaches and what have you. That's where, and it's flatter. That's where most of the population is concentrated, and around the Pointe-à-Pitre area where the airport is and what have you, which is, which is the economic capital of the island. So it's, I don't know, I guess it resembles a bit like Dominica, you know, very vertical. It's a
Yes.
place where you go and you get your spring water and what have you. It's very nature related, a lot of forest, a lot of deep rivers, and small communities such as Trois-Rivières, which is where you take your ferry to go to Les Saintes for a visit and what have you. Sparsely populated, but as I say, it's agriculture as well, agriculture based. But I couldn't give you a figure, frankly, but it is not the
Okay.
most populated area
Of the island.
yeah.
Okay.
It's just the most dramatic, if you will. It's a very dramatic area.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Caroline. I know that you have a ferry to catch, so we wanted to get you before, and I kept my promise of keeping it to 10:15. So
Thank you. Well, you take care. I wish
absolutely.
I could listen to your show. I do like you. I do enjoy it. So
Absolutely. And you're most welcome anytime to give us updates on what's happening in the French Caribbean. You have become our resource in that part of the region.
okay,
maybe some carnival coverage at some point.
okay. Well, we
Because
kind of missed
carnival is
that.
something.
Yeah, well, we had carnival.
Yeah.
Carnival is done. It was the first carnival
Yes.
after COVID and everything. So everybody was very glad to get back out there. Okay, well, I'll think of you. I'll definitely think of you
Absolutely.
when we have these big events, because we had the Tour de All, the round the island race with these traditional boats, the traditional sailboats that came back as well. I'll remember that. I'll remember. Not a problem.
Absolutely. Thank you again, and all the best on your journeys back to Martinique.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Caroline. You
Caroline.
take care.
Okay, bye
Okay.
bye. Viewers and listeners, we were speaking with Caroline Popovic. She is a French Caribbean journalist who was giving us an update on the damages the tropical storm Fiona did to the French Antilles, the French speaking islands of the Caribbean. At this point, we want to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are joined by Anande Trotman Joseph. We'll have a short conversation with her about the recently published report on the MNIB investigation that was conducted by the Integrity Commission, in Grenada. So we want to talk about that, talk about the work of the commission, and then we will get back to the two panel segments that we have for today. We have an economic panel segment and we have a media panel segment. So stand by, folks. We will be right back after this. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are?
These are the cards that I have drawn, that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
You're also a servant of the people. The unions are not threatening to withdraw their labor, and neither are they threatening to shut the country down, as you did.
I think your summarization of my position is highly inaccurate, and may I dare say a bit inflammatory.
The strategy did not work the last time for you. So what would make this?
Well, you're assuming that we doing the same strategy.
And viewers and listeners, at this time, we wish to welcome you back to this week's episode of the Bubb Report. And I am now joined by Mrs. Anande Trotman Joseph, Mrs. Joseph of the Integrity Commission in Grenada. Mrs. Joseph, I believe this is your first time appearing on the Bubb Report, so I wish to welcome you.
Indeed, and thank you very much, Dr. Bubb. It is the first time that I'm joining you and your listening audience. And it is indeed my pleasure.
Absolutely. So the Marketing and National Importing Board report, the findings were released last week by your organization. Now, the first question I have is your organization obviously does not have any authority to recommend charges, to press charges. So where does the report go from here?
Thank you very much for that question, but perhaps it takes me back a little bit about what we can do. And
Yes.
That is, of course, we were by law able, following our legal mandate under the Integrity in Public Life Act, to investigate, to inquire, of course, because that was the basis upon which we started, an inquiry. We determined our terms of reference. What is it we're looking for based on the information and the facts that were being disclosed. And we realized that in terms of our capacity, that we were unable to do this by ourselves. So what we did is that we relied on Section 12(2)(b) of our Integrity in Public Life Act, knowing that we could not operate as a silo, as a Lone Ranger kind of organization. And we called upon other law enforcement agencies, as well as the public service, including the Office of the Director of Audit, to join with us. We also sought legal advice, of course, and technical cooperation to make sure that the first inquiry of this kind ever in the state of Grenada was proceeding in accordance with best practices. So it was after we got all of this on board that we were able to complete. And then because we had other stakeholders with us, as I previously shared, from law enforcement in particular, our DPP is our chief investigator and the director of audit, because we were coming up against a lot of financial situations based on our inquiry and investigations, and a lot of financial documentation. So after we would have completed our own part, we shared our findings. Well, firstly, the terms of reference, the findings and other information with our stakeholders. We told them what our analyses were, and based on their inputs, our recommendations, and then we handed over our final draft report to these stakeholders. And then we await, for example, in terms of going forward, how the Director of Audit, perhaps how the Public Service Commission, the Ministry of Finance, in other words, the public service management with responsibility for the MNIB, and of course the DPP, will make certain determinations and share his findings at a later date.
So he would make determinations, but what I hear you saying is, obviously it goes to the hands of the DPP, but you don't necessarily recommend any further, perhaps criminal investigation or anything of that sort?
Well, in the course of our inquiry and investigations, we of course utilized the guidance in terms of summary offenses that may have been prevalent that we could possibly see. And I say that because, of course, you have to match the evidence and the facts with the offenses that are available to you under the Integrity in Public Life Act and the Prevention of Corruption Act. However, most of any possible offenses that we may have seen or considered would be summary offenses. And as we now know, that even by the time the media actually blew the whistle on what was happening, the former chairperson came to the media, time would have already begun to run, so that these summary offenses were not necessarily viable in any way. So what we also looked at was whether there were any indictable offenses, whether there were breaches of public sector management laws and rules and guidelines and best practices. So we looked at everything holistically, and then we made the recommendations, which have been sent to the relevant bodies. So yes, in terms of investigations, because we don't have prosecuting powers, we had to make sure that whatever we had, factually, we were able to get it together, collect it together, so that it could reach the public service managers for their actions, the DPP for, at this point, DPP Nelson for his actions through his office, the FIU, the RGPF. So there are some issues that are still up in the air, but it will be for the DPP under the criminal code now to determine whether there are any possibilities for taking further action. And I, of course, as you understand, I wouldn't want to prejudice his discretion, prejudice the rights of anybody involved in the course of our investigation by saying anything more at this time.
Okay. All right. Now, but I'm sure you can talk about the broad contours, the significant
Yes.
findings that emerged, which you did in the press conference.
Yes.
So, when you look at what your findings demonstrate, what did the commission conclude with respect to what went wrong at the MNIB that um, that needs to be corrected, that requires that course correction moving forward?
Thank you for that question, but of course, I'll have to put it in a nutshell. And
Yes.
I would have to say going forward, because of course now this is about going forward, and it is about national best practice for statutory bodies, in particular the MNIB. And because we acted, we took this bull by the horns, it now means that we have set standards for all of the statutory bodies across the state of Grenada. And I want to share with you beyond, because we now have a legal precedent that has told the legal system and the wider OECS region and beyond that integrity commissions have the jurisdiction to provide the kind of oversight that is required to advise the management of the particular entity, as well as to advise, I would say, the line ministry and the other public sector fiscal management agencies, including the Director of Audit's office, for example, to share with them what we think needs to be done. But in particular, with respect to the MNIB, we found that the board, any board, but in particular, the MNIB board needed to have paid further attention to what was happening there in that organization. And as someone who has been on boards myself during the course of my professional life, it is a reminder to myself, to my colleague commissioners and others, that sometimes you have to walk the floor of the organization that you are managing by way of board direction. There needs to be a greater emphasis. It's not just, yes, it's part-time and you're busy doing other professional things, but because you have a fiduciary duty, not only to the organization, but because it's a public service you're doing in a public sector organization, you have a duty to the taxpayers and the citizens, the vulnerable groups of this tri-island state. So you have to go the extra mile. You have to really interrogate the board minutes, the reports. You have to call in from time to time different areas of management led by their managers, question them, interrogate them, find out, take time and read the reports, sign off on the reports. Chairpersons have to sign off on the minutes that are being presented to them. In other words, we have to go the extra mile, and we would have expected that the board of the MNIB would have gone the extra mile, and any incoming board of that organization will need to do that. Ask questions. Why are our audit statements not being provided to the auditor? The auditor keeps writing, saying you're late, we cannot complete this audit. Information is missing. What is going on? As a board, you have to say, well, if we are behind, what can we do to step up? We have to say as boards, if our financial software is not working, we have paid X amount of money to the providers, what do? We ask, we inquire. If we're not being satisfied, you contact your external attorneys. to make sure that that provider complies with what has to be provided. And all in all, I have to say, even from the line ministry point of view, the persons who are representing the ministry on the boards, the ministers with responsibility, I think this is a perfect reminder to reset your management styles, the implementation of the mandates with respect to each statutory body that comes under the oversight of your line ministry. For us at the Integrity Commission, what we are doing, we've begun to do for some time now, is that we are working nationally to implement a risk management approach to the running of all statutory bodies, so that the boards must do the SWOT analyses, even if it means you have to bring in external assistance and support, including the assistance and support of the Integrity Commission, the FIU, the Procurement Department of the Ministry of Finance, and so on. In other words, we cannot be complacent. This is not just a place, a forum that is a statutory body where you can go and you just are fed certain minutes, you receive them, you exchange niceties, and you leave. This is serious business. It is not business as usual. And I think that the framers of these international conventions that Grenada would have ratified, the governments, the respective administrations who have, through their political will, embraced that a culture of integrity and prevention of corruption is required, I think it meant that we have begun the long road towards guarding even more vigorously through oversight, through action, through active management, through looking at our procurement and disposal rules as established by law, our financial management. I think that over the last decade, things are now coming together, and the Integrity Commission, having been given the legal mandate for oversight of these statutory and other public bodies, suddenly everybody is beginning to realize that you have to step up. This is not a place to go and exchange niceties at these board meetings, have your lunch or your tea or coffee and leave, but it's a lot of work. Yes, it's public service. If you don't have the time, if you don't have the dedication, you don't have the commitment, perhaps you have to accept that and share that.
Absolutely. Now we're going to take some viewer and listener comments, and a viewer, Margaret Francis, is asking, talking about boards, is the board going to be held accountable for this fiasco? Are there any mechanisms in place to hold boards accountable in general?
Yes, thank you for that question, viewer. There are mechanisms to hold boards accountable. Even within the MNIB Act itself, there are accountable mechanisms. The acts, and I will say to boards, especially incoming boards, as soon as you get there, look at the governing legislation of your particular board, because it will tell you that you have to follow certain rules. There are also national intersecting and cross-cutting pieces of legislation that tell you what you have to do. And you have to read, you have to know exactly what your roles and duties are. The line ministries, the Procurement Commission, the Integrity Commission, the Financial Intelligence Unit, the RGPF, the Director of Audit's Office, the DPP's office, all of these offices or commissions and entities, the Public Service Commission, the Ombudsman's Office, all of these oversight implementing organs of the government of Grenada have to work in a more, and I use a big word here, synergistic way together. But, I saw another comment flash. Everybody, in effect, or the whole of Grenada is corrupt. But who is doing the corrupting? The corruption has to be owned by everybody. The efforts to stamp out corruption, those efforts have to be owned by everybody. because yes, you may be saying people are corrupt, but corruption has to be a norm that is accepted and or enabled by the people of Grenada. So for us, we have a huge responsibility as a commission board as well as technical staff, because we realize, having accepted this responsibility, that what is required is called culture shifting. This is business that people are accustomed to doing as usual. Since independence, you set up your own infrastructure and things are done a certain way. Regime after regime comes in, they meet it and they continue. The people accept it. The people themselves will go and want to corrupt those who may be corruptible. So it is something that it is easy to point a finger and blame. But every Grenadian has to be accountable. For us, we have adopted a preventative approach that is a life cycle approach. So we are out rallying with our primary school children, our secondary school children. We're going into schools. We are working with them because we realize that unless from our toddler years, from our infants all the way through to our secondary and tertiary education levels, we have to ensure that our citizens from 0 to 100, if they live that long, are part of this life cycle preventative approach. We can't just try to regulate the adults and then fix it that way. That's not how culture is shifted. So we are doing what we required under the required functions and duties of our mandate under the Integrity in Corruption Life Act, and that is we are doing a lot of public education. We have beefed up greatly over the years our communications efforts. We have a web page, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, we tweet. But sometimes, Dr. Bubb, sometimes for some persons, they're not paying attention to that. So it goes in one ear and it comes out the other. We have collaborated with our media to carry our stories. Only this last week, we have done active training under our Center for Excellence training series, which we hold every year. And what we do annually, at least once, even during COVID, we expose all of the senior management board, the managers in all the public sector managers, even cabinet. And this is now successive. We have the assistance of the Commonwealth Secretariat. What do? We're not keeping this information to ourselves. We're not even only keeping it to ourselves in Grenada, but we have received, and Grenada and its people have accepted, that we are the home for training in combating and tackling the fight against corruption. So we have also from time to time invited sister organizations, integrity commissions and anti-corruption bodies to come to Grenada and be embedded with us to train here, because we are now being recognized as a regional to Commonwealth-wide best practice. And this is not by our own acclaim. This is what is being shared, because although we're small, although we are of course in need of a more significant budget to have that greater reach that is being demanded of us and is being required of us and is required by our legislation, we have together, both the commission and small staff, punched way above our budget, our resources, our own sometimes time to ensure that we get the job done. So
okay.
it's all
Yes. So we have another question. Speaking of all of us, Mr. Richard Regis is asking, so there is administrative findings, but you're saying it does not rise to fraud. I don't know that you're saying that. Are you saying it's mismanagement or fraud? I believe the viewer is confused.
Yes, so the viewer is confused. I want to say categorically, there is mismanagement. We are finding conditions, or we found conditions rather, based on the way, for example, records were kept, based on certain characteristics of the facts that were disclosed, that there were circumstances, putting it at its lowest, that were conducive to corruption, which may, of course, include fraud, may have included other aspects that suggest to us that the place was not being properly managed collectively, and that, who knows, but due to, if the evidence is there and the DPP can find that the evidence that was shared based on the facts determined, then it would be up to the DPP to make that determination. What we were about is the inquiring and the finding of the facts and the circumstances in accordance with our legislation that were conducive to corruption, conducive to fraud, and that determination, because we do not have prosecuting powers, but really facilitated the collection of the facts and certain evidence and certain circumstances to be laid over to the authorities, so to speak, the other public managers, then that will be disclosed as time goes on.
And we have another question from Brian Grimes. He's asking, is there a strategic alliance between the Ombudsman's Office and the Integrity Commission?
Thank you very much, Mr. Grimes. Yes, there is a strategic connection. And the reason for this goes right back to the beginnings of both organizations, because the laws were passed roughly at the same time to set them up. The Commonwealth Secretariat, right at the beginning, shortly after the period when the legislation would have been passed, but I know actively from around 2011, sent down consultants through the request of government via the Director of Public Administration's office, and that office resides in the wider office of the Prime Minister. Consultants were sent down. Support has been given over the years to ensure that both of these offices were established. In terms of training and capacity building that is carried out by the Integrity Commission, we believe in cross-training. We believe in collaboration. So every time we have the opportunity to train, to do capacity building, we view the Ombudsman's Office as one of our stakeholders. And I do believe that vice versa, they view us as one of their stakeholders. And I will give you an example. There have been instances where complaints have gone to them that are that office, the Ombudsman Office, that really should reside with the Integrity Commission. And likewise, we have received many complaints that really should go to the Ombudsman's Office. And so what we each do is redirect. Now, there is sometimes an issue that arises because under the Integrity in Public Life Act and the Prevention of Corruption Act, we are under a legal duty to keep confidential some of the information received by us. Even with this Marketing and National Board, Importing Board inquiry and in supporting investigation, there were certain persons that were demanding that we just disclose everything. However, we are bound by the secrecy and confidentiality duties imposed upon us. And also there is a provision in the Prevention of Corruption Act for us to receive what are called protected disclosures. So sometimes public officers want to come forward like whistleblowers, and we owe them a duty by law to keep confidential some of what is shared. Now, if we are prodded by the naysayers, by the demanders, and we just jump up and just want to, for the sake of our egos, to say some of what we know, because this is security information. You can't have certain information and place it at large to allow sometimes persons who are being investigated or even interviewed to hide or get rid of some of the information that is crucial to us, or just to clam up, or just say, speak to my lawyer, I have nothing further to say, as is their right. We are bound by our legislation, and if we breach that legislation, I'm telling you, we can be fined up to $20,000 per time, per issue, as well as face a year's jail. For other stakeholders and providers, that fine can go up to $200,000.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure, Mrs. Joseph, you don't want to make a jail in Grenada, right?
that's the point. So users, we want to be transparent about our methodology, but just to let you know and ask you to understand why sometimes we can't share everything. It's about the laws by which we are governed. You can go perhaps sometimes to your representatives, you can go to the legislators and ask them perhaps to take a more open approach to certain things. But there are laws, they are wider laws, and those have to do with principles of natural justice. And that is in accordance with the Constitution of Grenada. Even persons being interviewed, persons who we may be inquiring about or investigating, they have certain rights. And
The,
our
the, the due
laws will
process
tell
rights,
you
yes,
you are innocent until
proven
proven
guilty.
So you're
Absolutely.
calling upon
Yeah.
me to determine, is it fraud? Is the person guilty? So you will find that there may be times when we have to tell you, this is the methodology we use. This is the transparency of how we do it. But certain things we cannot tell you at this time. There's going to be, I know there's a lot of agitation for freedom of information, a Freedom of Information Act. So there will come a time perhaps when everything is laid bare. But in the meantime, we are bound by certain legal responsibilities, and we definitely, as a commission, we follow as far as we possibly can. We get legal advice for every step we take, and we really have to give credit to our advisors during the process of the MNIB, Ruggles Ferguson, with Patrick Superville in particular, the late Celia Klein QC, as well as very, very distinguished jurist and legal luminary from Trinidad and Tobago, that is Douglas Mendez SC. So,
Okay.
viewers, you have to understand, we are bound by the laws, and we are in
Okay.
the hands of the legislators. They will hear you, they will see these programs.
Yeah, so I have two more questions, Mrs. Joseph, and then we would get to the next segment.
Of course.
The previous administration, we're hearing conversations that there have been allegations of impropriety, allegations of corruption, allegations of not following proper government procedure. For example, the current Member of Parliament for St. Andrews Southeast, the Honorable Emmeline Pear, who was a former Minister of Education, she has come under public scrutiny recently over allegations of a non-profit organization in which she was involved. That's the Faith organization. There also a minister of government said in Carriacou recently that people are going to go to jail. Not that I believe a minister of government should be making those claims. That is for the judicial arm of government to decide, not for a government minister to decide. But having said that, it does appear as if there are lots of conversation around allegations of impropriety leveled against the previous administration. Have you been getting any of those reports at the Integrity Commission? And if so, can you share with us what you intend to do about those, if in fact those reports have been coming to the Commission?
We are seeing reports at large, and I want to put it that way, again, coming from the media. Based on our experience with the Marketing and National Insurance Board, we would ask that persons who are making these assertions, as for example, a social rights activist, Ms. Valerie Thompson from Carriacou, she followed up and was able to make her assertions via our complaint methodology, and this is what we encourage presently. And once those allegations are made following the present procedure, we would ask that it comes via this methodology. Now, I want to share and I think it is very timely that we are having this discussion at a time of a transformational change in our nation's political scene. And it's transformational because we are paying a lot more attention to all things that require a higher standard of integrity of all serving, past, present, and future persons who step up for service in public life at every level of government and, of course, governance. But in the Integrity in Public Life Act, there is a code of conduct in the 6th schedule of that act, which provides the standards that must be followed by all persons in governance and in public life. And that will be the standard by which the Integrity Commission will reconcile any reported actions of anyone in governance or public life. Now, and that is speaking with respect to the reports at large about this NGO, I believe it is.
Faith organization.
Faith organization. So we have not yet been fully apprised of what all of these assertions are, and we would urge anyone making any direct assertions to bring those facts to us so that we can have a look in accordance with the law as to what they are. Now, like I've said before, when it comes to us, we take a collaborative approach to it. So we will not just hug it to ourselves, but we will call in the relevant authorities, including where necessary, well, as a matter of law, our chief investigator by law, the DPP, where we think that is relevant, and hand over. I also want to say that some corruption, as we're saying, isn't corruption fraud. Some corruption may be plain criminal undertaking, and where it is not gray as to whether it is corruption, whether they should have followed best practices, whether a person is in breach of the code of conduct, and it is plain and simple. There were $20 here, and now there's not $20 here any longer. And there are procedures to deal with that under the criminal code. Somebody is seen with their hands in the cookie jar, plain and simple. There's a picture, there is the evidence. That does not necessarily come to us. But overall, together, when we add it up, it will tell you the story of the temperature of the corruption in our nation. And we will speak to that.
Now, Mr. Joseph, if I, as John Public, want to file a complaint with the Commission, can you walk me through the steps that would be required for me to make such a complaint?
Yes. So in a nutshell, you will come to the Commission, or you can go online. We do have a website, the GrenadaIntegrityCommission.org. You will get the complaint form. You will fill it up. You can do so. We're very user-friendly. You'll do so with the assistance of our staff, who will assist you in making sure that what you're saying, and we will tell you that what you're saying actually meets the requirement of a complaint, because there are certain benchmarks, certain standards, again, for making a complaint to the Commission. We don't want frivolous complaints. It must meet the criteria of our legislation as a complaint. If not, because you say so, or you get up this morning and feel that you're going to complain on Dr. Bubb because he is not talking kindly about something in this nation, and I'm going to file a report with the commission. That's not what it is about. We have to follow the laws of our nation in terms of making the complaint. It will then come to the commission after it has gone through the professional and technical side. We will then make a determination as whether this actually meets the standards for a complaint to the commission in accordance with our law. There are times, like I shared, we may send it to another entity, like the Ombudsman's office, for example, or to the RGPF, which organization is one of our stakeholders. The RGPF within it may send it to the FIU. And I must share that we do have memoranda of understanding, that is the commission, with the RGPF and the FIU. We sworn to secrecy by our laws. We take these oaths before the Governor General, and some of us have done this, like myself, before His Excellency Sir Carlisle Gleen, and then Her Excellency Dame Cecile de la Grenade. We take certain oaths, not only to serve and commit to serve, but also oaths of secrecy. Our staff, in some cases, have agreed to submit themselves to lie detector test if necessary. And the reason is the onus that is upon us, the MOUs that we have with the RGPF and the FIU require us to keep certain information secure. This is also not just about integrity. The integrity aspect of what we do is setting the foundation for a nation that has values and ethics of integrity. But the Prevention of Corruption Act, for which implementation and strategic approaches we also have responsibility for, require us at times to take a security approach that is like a policing approach, the gathering of the facts, the surveillance of persons of interest, and so on. And that is why we too have signed MOUs with the RGPF and the FIU. And that is why, unfortunately, or fortunately at times, you don't see us jumping all over media and giving out all of the facts of what we're doing. Because if, for example, you follow some of the investigations in America, for example, the Robert Mueller report that was eventually published. It is published, but it is also redacted. Because some investigations, as perhaps with the MNIB investigation, remain open. There were fires involved. That aspect of it will remain open. There are other aspects that will remain open, but they are with law enforcement. So I share all of this, that our acronym is the IC, not KFC. So I just want you to understand, it's not like that, okay? Viewers and stakeholders, because everybody in the public, every citizen is one of our stakeholders. So we plead for your understanding, for your taking the time to appreciate the laws of the nation, the Integrity in Public Life Act, the Prevention of Corruption Act. Go read them. They're on our website. So yes, we were challenged. You have no jurisdiction to undertake this. The courts had to uphold our jurisdiction. So now the bar is set, and it does make our work a lot easier, but it puts that much more responsibility as an impartial, non-partisan organization made up of 7 commissioners drawn from different professions and areas of public life, including the churches, to keep the entire unit honest. So, I just want to share with you that we are doing our best in accordance with our collective experiences as commissioners, with our commitment and dedication to following our own rules to manage conflict of interest internally, to be transparent with one another, to follow the law, as I said, but to get the work of fighting and tackling corruption done, not only by ourselves, but with everyone's help. It's everybody's business. It's everybody's fight.
Absolutely. And I have on the screen here now, I don't know how much work you do with organizations such as Transparency International. I know that a Commonwealth representative was in Grenada. I'm not sure if they were doing work with you, but it's interesting. This is what
They came to
Transparency.
us. They came to the Integrity Commission, part
That's
of
what I
our
thought.
public education, that we do a minimum of directly twice a year, and then we do a lot of other one-on-one education with statutory bodies and so on. But yes, Commonwealth has come to us and they evaluate our work from time to time.
Absolutely. But Transparency International says here the Corruption Perception Index for the public sector, that's for Grenada, showed 47 points in Grenada for 2021. The scale has a range of 0 to 100, in which corruption raises, the higher the number it is. With this result, Grenada ranks at 51st. So compared to other countries, it is at an average. Compared to the previous year in 2021, the level of corruption stayed without change. In the long term, it has nevertheless declined moderately in recent years. The United States are in 27th place with a score of 33. The ranking is led by New Zealand with a value of 12. The last place is occupied by South Sudan at 89 points. And the reason I bring that up is because I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this, but I'm very curious as to how corruption is measured. How do you measure when you say, for example, I remember a former minister, Anthony Bolson, when he appeared on the program one time, he walked out of the program when issues of corruption were raised. His ire was raised at that time. So how are these things measured?
Okay, so very quickly, I can see we actually, during our training this last week, and it will be posted onto our website for all viewers to have a look at how in depth this is treated with. So Grenada, as a matter of fact, has just been featured in a new publication by the Commonwealth Secretariat as one of 5 countries in the region, including the Bahamas, the Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Dominica, that are actively tackling corruption. Now, the Transparency International Index, we have to say, we have interrogated how we are being ranked here in Grenada. Now, what is notable is that Grenada, with a margin of error of 4 points, is being ranked consistently average between 56, 52. However, unlike the larger territories around the world, they are being ranked from 13 data strands. We are being ranked here on only 3 data strands. And that includes the legal, the World Bank legal organization, the Legal Juris Project. We're being ranked by the World Bank itself, the financial aspect of it. We are also being ranked by an organization called Global Insight. Although, of course, we're talking about Transparency International, we were unable to see what is determining the score given by the Global Insight. And we were told that, okay, it requires a payment of a certain amount of thousands of US dollars to be able to see. However, when we tried to do that, we were unable to access the information. But it is a perception index. Now, around the issue of naysayers, as I said a little earlier, everybody's pointing a finger. Oh, it's really dramatic to say that one did something and that one did something. But like I say, it is on all of us. So we may be given questionnaires by these organizations, and it's sometimes very nice when they ask, is it fair? Are efforts being made? Are they doing good, excellent, fair, poor? Of course, you have to be truthful. But sometimes as a nation, as persons who are filling up these questionnaires, you need to take a time out. This has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with Grenada's reputation, because depending on what is being the rankings, then it will determine whether they are going to be investments or not, whether investors will pull out of our nation because our ranking is too low. So I think we need to be a little more intentional as a nation. It is easy to be naysayers. I don't like this person on the commission. I don't like that body. Yes, this body is corrupt and that body is corrupt. Okay. However, as I said, it is a collective action. And the Transparency International Index is about perception mainly. So what is the World Bank saying about us? In the last decade or so, a lot of effort has been made to ensure that this integrity legislation, prevention of corruption, the procurement legislation is tightened up, that there's accountability under the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Grenada took the lead in a lot of these areas over the last decade to 12 years or so to tighten up our accountability in the public financial and public sector management sector. And if you look at the disaggregated data, the World Bank is showing that, yes, they're making the efforts. Now, look, for example, too, and I would say I saw that as a legal person, when we had the Oscar Bartholomew situation case going on, we took a little dip there. But we are a part of a regional system. So we all have one court of appeal, one regional registrar, and a national registrar. Why are we then not being ranked equivalent to, let's say, St. Lucia or Dominica? Let's look at it. We have to be objective. There's a lot more crime in these places, but yet their legal system is looking really good. So we too, when we are filling up these forms as citizens, we have to be objective. So let's look at it politically now. You may like one party and you don't like another party. When that party is in government, you give it a terrible scoring. The other one comes in and the other 50% that are out, they give the other one a terrible scoring. No, we have to be intentional. This is not just about them. They are only representatives of we the people in Grenada. Let us be intentional when we are sharing the perception. It's not a reflection on them, it's a reflection on us. And I think when we are looking at speaking about corruption, I think it is very important, again, and I want to end because I know my time is practically up.
Yes, because we have to get to the next segment. Yeah.
That is about the name of Grenada, Carriacou, Petite Martinique, and its citizens. Politicians may come, you may like them, you may not like them, you like them for a time, but they will go and others will take their place because you put your trust in them and put them there for the time that they will remain. But Grenada, the country, the constitution, the laws, the standards, these will remain. You, your children, your grandchildren, the sacrifices of your foreparents, your grandparents, this is what we must represent here and to the world at large. Please, let us examine our own values, our own ethics, and know that who we are is really about what we do when no one is looking. Not just about what we say publicly, but let us look within, look at ourselves in the mirror.
Mrs. Trotman Joseph, I believe this was a very informative segment, very, very informative. I learned a lot, certainly, and I believe the work of the Integrity Commission is so critical. And so I did hear that you are engaged in some public education activities, including for media stakeholders, and I believe media stakeholders do need to be educated, including myself. I am not a know-it-all. I always thirst for knowledge, so I will be relying on your office whenever these issues emerge. And please, if you do have any reports and any other investigations that come your way, we would be certainly more than happy to cover it as well on the Bubb Report. But certainly the feedback from the viewers has been positive in terms of what you have been able to impart this morning. Any final comments?
Thank you. And just to say, with all humility, I stand on the shoulders of the entire circuit. I'm only the spokesperson here this morning. but there are so many, both past, present commissioners, the first chairperson, Sir Lyle St. Paul, second chairperson for Dame Monica Joseph, all of the serving commissioners, the serving staff, hard working. Sometimes you pass there at night and they're still there trying to get this report out, another report, investigations, meeting board meetings, and so on. So I want to say that it takes a collaborative approach, a team approach, a team effort to be able to humbly say to you that we are still growing, we are still learning, but what remains is that we remain committed and dedicated to do our best with great humility.
Absolutely. Mrs. Trotman Joseph, thank you again. I hope to see you on the Bubb Report very soon again as we engage in these conversations, but it was certainly a pleasure having you.
And thank you. It was my pleasure to join you and your listeners today.
Absolutely.
Have a great day.
Have a great day as well. Viewers and listeners, that was Miss Anande Trotman Joseph of the Integrity Commission of Grenada. Stand by. We would now segue into our panel segment of the week. We have both Mr. Christopher Diali here and Dr. Stephen Fletcher to talk about the economic issues that Grenada currently confronts. But we wish to remind you that the next segment of the Bubb Report comes to you compliments S.A. Johnson Funeral Home. They are a Caribbean family-owned funeral service who offer a full range of funeral services at affordable prices in the city of New York. They can be reached at 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity. And folks, stand by. We would be right back with the panel segment of the week.
Very proud of what you're doing, and I think it's much needed. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you again for watching the Bubb Report. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you sincerely. Ashley, thank you so very much. Senator Chester Humphrey, welcome to the Bubb Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program. The Honorable Jumani Williams, we call him Jumani, who is the public advocate for the city of New York. The Honorable Baz Diopande, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pandey, welcome to the Bubb Report of Grenada. The Honorable Tobias Clement. Mr. Clement, welcome to the Bubb Report. Is it Nicolai or Nikolai? I hope I pronounced it.
Nikolai.
It's Nikolai. Thank you.
Yes.
And welcome to the program, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist. Mr. Randall Robinson, you are here in your private capacity and in your personal capacity. Yesterday, we learned that you were detained by law enforcement in Grenada. So you come from a family of public servants.
Yes, we are a family of public servants.
You're saying that you have to do more, but my question is, what have you done as President of the Union to ensure that that happens?
To the cards that I have drawn that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are? And viewers and listeners, welcome back. At this point, I wish to welcome the panel segment, the first panel segment of the week, Mr. Christopher Diali, who is a returning guest here on the Bubb Report. We always welcome his perspectives, and certainly he has a lot to bring to the table given his service, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And Dr. Stephen Fletcher as well, who is also returning guest to the Bubb Report. Now, gentlemen, the reason I assembled the both of you here was to talk about the declarations by the government of Grenada with respect to the measures that they're putting in place to mitigate against the current cost of living and inflation crisis in the state. Now, do you believe, and Mr. Diali, I would start with you, do these three key measures, we talked about the removal of the gas subsidy there, the removal of incentives for Grenlec bills, and the cap on freight. Would these measures go far enough, do you believe, in alleviating some of the concerns that the ordinary citizens have in the country?
Good morning, Karan, and good morning to your viewers and listeners. Well, probably I could start with the cap on freight and then move to the other two quickly. I don't think the cap on freight is going to assist with any sort of relief in terms of inflationary pressures being exhibited now. And the simple reason is that the freight increases that we got and still receiving, the private sector companies that receive that and other companies still have to pay the higher freight. The real issue is between 2019 and what we're seeing now, the difference in that freight and how that difference compares to what the cap on freight will bring, which is a reduction in duties and the savings you will get. In my initial calculations, the difference we would have paid in freight and the savings we would have got in the duties that we would have paid on the 2019 formula is going to be far outweighed by what we have paid already in freight on these goods and services coming in. So the net effect is that the companies would have paid more in terms of freight versus the savings they would have gotten with the cap on freight on duties and so on that will be calculated.
Now, I'll stick up in there, Mr. Diali. The government would say, though, that that is a recommendation that the private sector made. So if it's not going to necessarily make a dent, why would the private sector, or at least elements of the private sector, make that recommendation?
Well, I think at the time the private sector would have made the intervention because they felt that the increase in fees, for example, in some places was 100+%, and they were looking at the effect immediately being transferred to their customers and what that would cause. Going back to our 2019 freight level, they would have assumed that that would have helped in terms of the calculation and what would be passed on. But you could say the degree of pass on, if you didn't have the cap on freight, would be much higher than what we exhibited now. But in terms of how that will affect in terms of inflationary release, I don't think that it is going to achieve the effect that they want. And then there's the other complications of inventories that would have incurred this freight and the high costs that would have already been costed at that high values, and what will happen to inventory even though this cap on freight in 2019 comes forward. And then we haven't gotten much details from the Ministry of Finance regarding what the cap will cover. Is it less than container loads, what type of goods? Is it construction material? Is it across the entire spectrum? There's a lot of more details to work out in terms of how this will work and what is going to happen. And you do this against the context of freight generally worldwide have started to come down. So the question is whether this revenue measure, loss of revenue measure for the government is something that is needed, understanding that the real effect to the average consumer will not be perfectly met, and so on. So it is one of those things that I think need a deeper analysis in order to understand the effect and the true pass-on effect of it.
Let me bring in Dr. Fletcher here. Dr. Fletcher, can you hear us? I'm not too sure if you're having any technical issues, but please proceed if you can.
I am hearing you. I am hearing.
Yeah. So the same question. Do these measures go far enough?
Well, let me first say morning to you, Kellon. Morning to my colleague, Mr. Diali, and morning to all your followers on social media. It's a pleasure to be here and to get involved in issues of public policy and so on as we proceed. Okay, let me say the following, that some of the measures, in fact, are probably aimed at impacting on inflation, some probably not. But overall, let us contextualize this, that inflation in Grenada, i.e. the general increase in price of commodities, are import push. In other words, it is significantly impacted by what we import. And therefore, if the public policy position is aimed at, in fact, negating the negative consequences of inflation, in other words, the higher increases in inflation, we have to look at areas where government can control and where government can exert some influence. Certainly at the cost of goods, because goods are cost by the cost of the good, the insurance and freight. As an importing country, we cannot impact the cost of the item. That takes place outside of our control. Neither could we also affect insurance. So government has to ask itself, what are the policy instruments that it has available that can be used to address these external shocks, these external influences. So, for example, let us look at the cap on freight. It is, at the moment, it is constructed around 7 regions, okay? North America, South America, CARICOM, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Oceania. And the data, in fact, shows that it varies. In 2022, there has been a general increase in freight charges. And that if you were to put the cap on the 2019 charges, you are likely to receive some amount of benefit, right? Some amount of reduction in taxes due to government and to the final consumer. So, Kellan, fundamentally, I think this policy is aimed at sharing and spreading. In other words, there are some benefits here. Let us share those risks. And where the benefits occur, let those benefits also be spread among the population. So the critical question here, I have no doubt that some goods will be low. The challenge of the cost of the items could sometimes, probably on a product by product analysis, negate the freight charges, but we have to analyze that further. But the critical question would be the extent to which the reduction in prices that will be obtained by the importer is passed on to the final consumer. This will be a critical factor in determining to what extent that saving, right, would be passed on. So, for example, if there was a 0.77% increase in 2022, and we are to go back to 2019, and you will have it will be at around 0.62%, will that benefit, as small as it is, will that be translated and go through the supply chain network and end up to the benefit of the final customer? That is where the significant challenge lies. And this is where the corporate social responsibilities of companies, of businesses, will have to come in to influence the benefit that is sought through that public policy construct.
All right, Mr. Diallo, you heard Dr. Fletcher here. I believe that the both of you have said the same thing with respect to really looking at the data with respect to what items would be affected and how you intend to cut those prices on those items. Your thoughts?
Well, respectfully, Dr. Fletcher and I will have to disagree on that. I understand Dr. Fletcher's issue as a public policy consultant, but I, as a private sector person who operates in the daily understanding of costs and what can be passed on or not, this doesn't, this particular policy that construct does not offer any net saving to the person, the supplier, not the supplier, the business that is incurring the costs. As I indicated earlier, if your net increase in freight is greater than your net savings in the duties, there is nothing to pass on. And I hear Dr. Fletcher talk about corporate social responsibility. We are all here with CSR, but you can't pass on something that it doesn't materialize. For us, it is about managing the cost as a business and how you could best deal with your efficiencies or inefficiencies within your business and see how you can get cost savings to minimize the impact of the transfer. So to me, that is where the issue is, and not about whether, because if a business doesn't get a net savings, they can't pass it on. It's as simple as that. There's no other way to look at it. And that is what we have to be clear about. And so I hear him, so respectfully we'll have to disagree, because when I crunch my figures at my institution, I am not seeing a net savings. If I'm bringing in a container from China that in 2019 was costing me 6,000 US and it's now gone to 12,000 US, the difference is 6,000 that I have to pay to get the container here. If the savings in freight, let's say we take 30% of that in 2019, 30% of 6,000 is 1,800, 30% of 12,000 is 3,600. The difference in savings is not comparable to the increase in freight. So the net effect to the business is an increased cost, not savings. And I mean, as simple as it can get. So we will have to disagree on that particular issue.
Yeah, and before I get you to comment on the other, a WhatsApp question is asking if the cost of charges on the port is also contributing to increased costs, especially in the context of the labor costs paid to the workers, Seamen and Waterfront Workers Union.
No, that has always been there. I think Dr. Fletcher is correct when he says most of our inflation in Grenada is imported inflation, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And there's very little the government has in terms of policy knobs that they could push in order to deal with it. And there is very little room that they have. If you're importing inflation, you're importing. The cost of labor at the port has always been an issue that we've had to deal with. The other critical thing is that worldwide, there is a serious increase in the cost of goods because of the demand and supply issue that I'm quite certain Dr. Fletcher is aware of. In my business in the last year and a half, we have seen 30 to 40% increases in raw material costs. And that has nothing to do with local or what is happening local. That is an international policy situation with demand and supply. And we believe that that situation is going to increase. I think, Dr. Bubb, you mentioned in the beginning of this program that consumables in terms of food are projected to continue to increase significantly. I think it was 8.6% you announced. And that is the
correct.
trend. That is the trend that we are seeing as well. And that have nothing really to do what we do on the local scene. It's all about what is happening internationally and what we are getting at the ports when the goods come in. We have a lot of discussions about how we eat and what we eat, and do we look inwards to see if we could save on costs in vegetables and consumables at that end. And a lot of discussion about efficiencies of operations and if we could save there as well and how we could operate. But then there's the other question that I know we'll get to, which talks about fuel and what is happening to us there as well, and how that translates into increased cost to the ordinary consumer and inflationary pressures. So I know when we get there, we will share a little more about that. But I don't think that, that's my humble opinion, that the one on the captain of the freight is going to significantly affect or impact prices in any way.
Dr. Fletcher?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I mean, I think that the general policy is aimed in the right direction. Really trying to see how you can take actions that can impact on the inflationary pressures that consumers are faced with. I've established that we cannot, as a country, really cannot affect the cost of the item, right, from where it's from source. So what are the policy instruments we have? Government, by their actions, have decided they're going to give up a certain amount of revenue in order to positively impact on prices. Now, I would argue that the impact will not be significant in some respects, but this measure in particular is focused on food items, where, as you have pointed out, Dr. Bubb, we are seeing the kind of runaway inflation, especially on commodity items that are occurring. So it's aimed at that, and it is an opportunity for us to see whether that measure is going to work and to what degree. I think it will work to some degree. We'll see some reduction in prices, but it is not going to be significant. So you're not going to walk into the supermarket and probably see an item down by $5. You know, it might be down by $1.00 or less. But what is important, as I understand it, there is going to be some test case going on where the prices will be specifically monitored at a particular outlet that will be chosen, a supermarket, I suspect, and to really look to see how these prices are being affected directly from that reduction that is taking place. So the simple construct methodology is that if government taxes, which also contributes to the final product, is calculated on the basis of cost, insurance, and freight, and you are able to impact on one of those three areas, you are likely to see a possible decrease in prices. However, may I say this and underline this, and I think this is where Mr. Diali and I converge, in that if the other cost elements far outweigh far outweigh the reduction that is going to be incurred in freight, then you're not likely to see the kind of impact that you want to see. And hence, let me say this. The fight against inflation, the fight against price increases takes on multiple forms, multiple instruments that government will have to use in order to effect it. One is freight. That will be, I suspect, that will be monitored, it will be looked at, and whatever other policy leverage that the government has will have to be looked at to see to what degree and to what extent you can, in fact, have the desired public policy effect that you want to have. Because it is about reducing cost of living to everyone. It's about giving the population an opportunity to see their dollar bring them some value in the context in which, as a vulnerable small island state that depends on imports, right, especially food imports, we'll have to see to what extent we can pull different levers to effect the change, the reduction in price. In fact, probably not even reduction, but really the management of prices. The management of prices, because in this context, given what's happening in the international arena, the Ukraine war, the impact on freight charges, the lingering effects of COVID on freight and, things as container prices. Although, let me add one little detour here, that there is a slight decrease that is beginning to take place regarding freight charges in some areas. But again, it is a good policy lever that has been used, and we must see what other levers are in place rather, to effect the change that you want to see, which is the management of inflation.
Absolutely. And let us get some viewer comments into this conversation, folks. Chenny Joseph is saying government cannot be left as the only party responsible for the fight against inflation. Buyers, too, must look at their abilities to negotiate further reductions, including suppliers. I believe he's throwing that one at your feet, Mr. Diali, as an entrepreneur. I mean, businesses, you're in business to make money. You're not in business for charity. As cold as that may sound, that's just the reality, yes?
Yeah, sorry, Chenny is correct in that most of us in business have to go back to suppliers and look at how we negotiate our prices. So some forms that are available to us are, for example, we give suppliers our demand for the year in terms of volumes of raw materials, and we try to negotiate contracts and prices and lock them into a price. But what the suppliers are telling us quite upfront, that they are not locking in any prices anymore. So you will have a situation that we have had in 2022, where you go to a supplier, you locked in a price in the first quarter of, say, January to March, and just before they send your shipment to you in March or late February, they'll tell you there's a price increase of 200 US per kilogram. Are you still wanting to take the supply? And at that stage, there's very little negotiating room you have. You have to take the supply at the increased price because, of course, these suppliers will tell you if you don't take it, they send it to somebody else. So then what do you do in terms of your negotiating power with your suppliers? It becomes very limited or non-existent at all. And that is some of the challenges we've had to do. So what is the impact for us? What we have had to do in my case, for example, I used to have a holding stock of 6 weeks in raw materials. I now have to double that to 12 weeks and sometime more. The holding costs have significantly gone up. My warehousing space is challenged. I have to rent new warehousing. So the cost overall has gone up, but I have to do that to mitigate these instances of sudden price increases just before shipment and other things. And then there's the cartel arrangements with these suppliers. A lot of these suppliers are forming themselves into groups and having these so-called cartels that will tell you that, and the freight suppliers and the freight people are a similar group. And I hear Chenny, but their group, all the various freight suppliers to the region are basically in a cartel. And when you talk about charges, the period coming up, the busy period, September, October to December, you get these increased charges like congestion charges, bunker surcharge have gone up by X amount. So your cost per TFU in your containers have gone up by 100 or 120 US dollars per container, and all of these things come about. Recently, I think Congress in the US, the Biden government passed a law recently that put some restrictions on how these freight forwarders and freight suppliers can increase costs without justifying and going to Congress for these increases. So there is some relief on that side, but generally, you as a business in this region have very little negotiating power, and your negotiating power over recent time have been seriously eroded because of the practices that have come about because of the same issue of supply and demand. There's greater demand than the supply. And the issue is steel is a good example, Killer. When you watch at the cost of how steel have increased for construction and the construction sector, there is very little any of us can do in terms of managing that, as Dr. Fletcher is saying, and what is happening. And it has increased in some places. Projects, they cost by more than $50,000 based on the cost of steel, the cost of cement, and these fundamental things that is required for construction. So, I mean, I hear that, but realistically, there is very little we could do. And those of us who have what is required to do what we can do are implementing where we can to hopefully reduce the impact of the pass on to the final consumer. Because in my business, for example, paint is not something that is consumable in terms of food. So we have to manage what we pass on and take some hit on our profit line because we can't pass on all. And if we do that, no paint will sell because people have to eat before they paint. So it is also a delicate balance for businesses who are not in the food business and what they can do in order to pass on and what they can pass on.
Mm-hmm. Now, and let us get to gas. Of course, you were about to preempt that, but we'll segue into that conversation. Now, as of midnight, and of course, the Prime Minister also previewed that new prices at gas stations as of today, $12.74 EC cents there, and diesel $14.57. Was it wise to remove that subsidy that was there? Because it does appear that gas prices are trending downward, but that does not mean that the volatility with respect to gas prices will not continue. This may not be a new normal, but certainly it is a welcome relief at the pumps. Your thoughts?
Of course, it is a welcome relief. The issue here is in the last government, I think, had passed a law regarding the capping and what their contribution from gas must be and where it was at. I think they were at the maximum, and that would have caused gas prices to be higher than normal. Removing the cap gives the government less revenues, and that is another concern. When you remove these caps, you're getting less revenues, especially when the government needs revenues across all forms, as Dr. Fletcher would advise, in order to meet its obligations monthly and otherwise. So we have to be careful. And, there's a policy within government that talks about revenue neutrality, which simply means that you don't drop your revenues unless you can see where else you can increase it, because you want to be at a revenue neutral point of view in order to meet your obligations on a consistent basis and meet all that you have to. So you have to be careful with that. And as we know, the cost of gas at the pump or even at Grenada is seriously dictated by the cost of fuel and what that fuel charge is. The removal of the 20% or 25% on the Grenada bills is important, and I support it from the point of view that Grenada needs to get its cash back into its coffers to operate as efficiently as they ought to, and make sure that they have the necessary processes and redundancies in place that we don't have issues with outages. And that is important. The necessary effect of that is that your bill at Grenada is going to go up by 25%. Remember, the last government also, I believe, took off environmental levy, which was at 10%. So government is currently subsidizing the Solid Waste Authority in terms of monies given to them to meet their obligations in keeping the nation clean. So there is a lot of things here that we need to understand as a country and as a people, that government only has so much they can do and not do in order to deal with the inflation. And the real reality is that, as you indicated, Kiran, once the volatility of the fuel prices keep coming up and down, if we want to work with that formula, then we have to be prepared. In some countries, I mean, England is one of those countries that I think, as a huge European nation, when you looked at cost of fuel at the pump, it is ridiculously high because the governments have decided not to subsidize. Trinidad heavily subsidizes theirs, And as Trinidad removes subsidies from their fuel, you will see people complain about the cost of fuel. So it really comes back down to, as Dr. Fletcher was saying, whether you want public policy to influence inflation as you can in these measures, and at the same time impact revenues, and then balance that against your commitments that government has to meet in terms of its salaries and wages and all those other things, and pensioners' costs that they have to meet on a recurrent basis.
Dr. Fletcher?
Dr. Bubb?
Yeah, if you can turn your camera on. I don't know what issues you're having with the internet, but as a visual medium, there you go.
It's something create fluctuations, and you get the probably it's a critical issue we need to look at sometime, Kelon, the extent to which we have a robust internet infrastructure for the digital economy that we wish to build. So
I agree with that.
I
endorse that. Yes.
So you know, one of the challenges we have in public policy and in management of economies is really how do you find appropriate measures on an ongoing basis to satisfy the developmental goals of the country, the needs of the population, and the various stakeholder demands. It is a challenge, and so too on the issue of the inflation, and specific to the topic we're now on, the price at the pump. It is also a challenge that we have to find. The measures, for example, on the freight will probably cost government in the tune of $4 million, right, in the short term. But also remember that those measures are not temporary measures. I think the Prime Minister has indicated that it will be reviewed, it will be constantly monitored, and changes will be made as and when deemed necessary. The same thing goes for the fuel at the pump. Now at $15 cap, it was again a policy instrument used by the then government to try to negate the impact of soaring oil prices. But in implementing such a policy, government revenue was also negatively impacted.
But government revenue would also be negatively impacted on the other side of the ledger as well. So
right. This is why I started by putting it in context.
This is a high wire balancing act, really. But please proceed.
This is why I put it in context earlier on to say that it is a challenge of the mix of instruments you have and how, in fact, you can control or manage those prices. So, for example, at the moment, the fuel prices and the change that have occurred this morning put the gas price as $12.72. Cap has been removed. The government has indicated that they will monitor it, and if the prices go beyond a certain level, they will again intervene in the marketplace. One question that have been raised, Dr. Bubb, and I'm sure Mr. Diali must have heard that as well. Persons are saying, well, you know, it is good to put the cap on, it is good to put measures in place, but shouldn't citizens also have a responsibility for the conduct of their behavior? For example, driving. So we have a cap on $15, and therefore we drive everywhere. It has impact on, for example, public transport policy, right? So gas prices are low. It is capped, government control. We tend to use private vehicles as much as we could. So probably allowing the fluctuation will probably influence individual transport means to say, well, you know, probably the use of public transport should be looked at closely, right? Now, the challenge we have in Grenada is that we really do not have a very coherent, well-organized public transport system. That is missing. You get on a bus, it can take you 20 minutes to reach in point A, but the bus stops, it deviates all through the back roads looking for passengers, right? I'm not criticizing the bus drivers here. They have bills to pay. They need to ensure that the bus has a certain capacity before they move on. But it probably calls for a wider discussion on how we use public policy and fuel prices to affect things like transport and the environment. Because the more vehicles we have running up and down the street, the greater the impact on the negative impact on the environment. So it calls into question this whole issue of the use of public policy levers to impact behavior and to impact the conduct of various things. Now, government may very well if the price increased beyond a certain point, probably one of the things that could be looked at is some discretionary use of policy to effect public transportation, right? So you may not want to put a general cap because of the loss of government revenues and other things, but you may wish to look at a sector, for example, buses, public buses, and probably put some special measures in place to negate whatever effect. The good thing, however, Kellon, I've been looking at the actual forecast of fuel prices over the next 2 or 3 years globally, and barring any exogenous negative factor coming into play, another war or something like this, or terrible hurricane and so forth, there tends to be forecasting a general decrease in prices and stabilization of prices. So hopefully we will benefit from that throughput, that the fuel that we import will probably remain within good measure, right? And therefore, starting at the $12.72 or 74 cents per gallon, it will be able to be managed throughout. But nonetheless, Kellon, I will tell you, for the driving public, a reduction for any period of time in the price of gas
is a relief.
Is a relief.
But it's a relief there. But you look at your Grenadian bills and you're saying, okay, well, I have a relief at the pumps, but I don't have a relief of my electricity. And I know that, as I said so last week, there are a lot of people who are doing things in the dark, really. They are doing their best to conserve electricity, and yet they're hit with these very high electricity bills. And that's going to be the context of the next conversation. And Mr. Diali, I would start with you. If regular consumers are complaining about the electricity bill to the extent that they are, then I can't imagine what that overhead looks like for people like yourself in the private sector.
Oh, it is going to be something significant. But I think I agree with Dr. Fletcher in that individual behaviors have to come in to some degree to manage costs going forward. But that being said, there is very little Grenadian could do, quite frankly, and there's very little levers the government could pull here in order to reduce the effect of this. The last government tried it. It was in place for a certain amount of time. And now it has come to a point where they no longer can keep it because Grenadian needs to get their business back in order in terms of their cash flows and other things that needs to be done to manage the business efficiently and effectively and to give consumers reliable service. So the question becomes, do we adopt the increase, take the increase, and have a service where we have very little outages, or do we go the other way? Deal with the outages as they come because we can't maintain as we ought to and have Grenadian operate efficiently. So I believe we between a rock and a hard place, and as a people, we need to decide what needs to be done. But I want to just throw out an idea to Dr. Fletcher. As he's mentioned, the issue of public transport, and that's a significant cost for us as well as a people and for the ordinary man that uses transport. And Dr. Fletcher, I believe that the time has come where the government needs to, through the Green Climate Fund, look to access funding and develop a PTSD as we had years ago during the revolution, and bring in 12 EV buses and have these EV buses operate to deal with school children, particularly to give families relief of moving their children from one point to point A to point B, and then extend it to the public after a certain amount of hours, say after 6 or 7 in the night, so that the private bus owners can still make their money and do what they have to do. But I believe that is something we now have to seriously have public discourse on, and government needs to see how they can move into that. Because the use of EVs and hybrid vehicles is something as a small country we need to significantly get into, I believe, so that we could save ourselves and see how we can manage the costs going forward. And I know government have had a policy that passed, and I suspect this one will, that all duties and taxes related to alternative energy and alternative energy mechanisms and materials, and in this case is commodities like buses and so on, will be free from these duties and so forth. So this is something I just want to throw out to you, so as a policy consultant to the government, and probably something they could start that conversation on, because I believe the quicker we get there, the easier it will be for people to move about and at significantly less cost. And the other thing we have with transport is that buses stop run at a certain hour in the night, 7, 8. If we extend that to 12 in the night, it increases commerce. It increases confidence in people being able to move from point A to point B with reliability. And hence, you will get economic activity in your country that you need to manage your GDP going forward and all the other social programs that the government needs to constantly keep maintaining for people to have a productive life.
Dr. Fletcher, he's throwing that suggestion at your feet. As a matter of fact, I was under the impression that with the buyback of Grenlec, that customers would now be able to be free to engage with things like solar energy and harnessing that. Of course, the buyback happened recently, but given how extensive electricity prices are, how expensive they are, I think now is a good time to really have a serious conversation about how we are really investing in solar energy.
Absolutely, Dr. Bubb. I think this what appears to be a crossroad that we are in now in terms of our development trajectory is a useful point for us as a nation to reflect on our development choices and our development path. So let me just reference here the suggestion made by my colleague, Mr. Diali. It is a welcome one. We need to seriously look at this because you cannot develop a country without a good transport system. You really can't. You have to move goods, you got to move people, So we got to ensure that this transportation issue is dealt with. And dealt with in a serious policy format. It can be done with government on its own. It can be done in relation to the private sector, private bus owners working with government to find the appropriate policy mix to ensure that the transportation issue is resolved. Now, specific to the issue of Grenlec, Grenlec is caught in a storm, really. We have a number of factors impacting on fuel, but as well on the organization. The state has regained control of Grenlec at a time when you are dealing with aging engines. Generally, engines are old. They're due for repairs and maintenance becoming much more frequent, and therefore costs becoming frequent. One of the new engine, I understand, which was bought in 2020 or 2021, there are also issues with it that's contributing towards this. But Grenlec for us, folks, let us contextualize this. This is a strategic security issue as far as I'm concerned. I would treat Grenlec in that manner. It's a strategic resource, but it's also
So you are agreeing with Dr. Mitchell, former Prime Minister. You are agreeing. You are agreeing with Dr. Keith Mitchell, former Prime Minister, when he says that it is a national security asset.
To that degree, yes. To that degree, national security asset it is. And therefore, it ought to be treated in that way. And therefore, the policy measures that are to be taken must ensure the survivability of Grenlec, not just to survive, but to produce efficient and reliable energy to the people of this country, to the manufacturers, to households, and so on. So we have that issue. And therefore, the 25% reduction that we saw was of significant cost to Grenlec. It impacted on revenues, right? My understanding is that probably, and it's approximate here, that the company might have lost close to 20 or 20 plus $1 million during that period to date. And remember, again, this was a temporary measure put in place, so it needs to be reviewed and recalibrated. The other issue that you are facing the company at this time, when revenues from its core business is on the decline, you have to deal with salary increases of almost 30%. That is going to cost the company anywhere in the region. Some estimates put it at $11 million or $16 million. So you have these significant millions of dollars that the company has to be able to put its hands on to keep the company generators up and running, to keep the staff motivated and happy, and to ensure that the staff continue to work in a secure environment. Yeah, so it is a challenge, and therefore this removal of this cap of 25% as much has to be seen as a balancing act, really, to ensure that this strategic asset that we have, is secured, is in place to ensure that the manufacturers have power, that our houses have power, that small businesses are able to actually perform, and very importantly, at a time when in the school system, we are more and more turning to the internet as source of information and teaching aid, we need to ensure that this resource remains stable. So as a country, we have a choice. We have a choice. This might be one of the areas that we need to look at in order to ensure that there might be some amount of understanding. There might be some amount of understanding by the public of certain burdens that we have to share. And probably one of the areas might be in medium term, an increase in electricity prices, right? While we look at recalibrating this to find an appropriate price point at which the country will be comfortable with. But we need to look at the energy issue. The alternative energy is also important to be looked at, but we must also bear in mind that it has a high initial investment cost. We can talk of solar and so on and other means, and therefore it brings Dr. Bubb and viewers, listeners, Mr. Diali, the central focus. What is our energy policy going forward? What is the mix we are looking at? I know there was a draft policy years ago. Probably we need to take that out, dust it off, rethink it, relook it, and deal with it with some velocity. We need to push it on. We need to change the mix. But importantly, while we do that in the medium and long term, in the immediate, we need to save GrenLec to ensure, as Diali indicated earlier on, that we give and we ensure that GrenLec has the resources, the financial resources it needs to provide the country with reliable energy supply. Right?
Dr. Bubb, if I could quickly say
yes,
to
please. Yes,
Dr.
please
Fletcher
proceed.
that
Yes.
in terms of the energy policy, I don't think we have to start from the beginning. We have Barbados as a very good example in our region that has a very strong energy policy and mix.
Yeah.
We could refer to that. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We could start right there and start fashioning our policy to suit our needs. And I think, yes, you're quite right that is an area where we need to start. But we also need to do significant work with the PERC, because the PERC itself, in my view, needs to understand their true role as a regulator versus a regulator and a quality control organization. So there is need for us to do a significant amount of work for those of us who want to go into PV systems. You know, we're not happy with what is happening at PERC in terms of the regulation, because we're not clear in our minds as to how investments can be recouped under the PERC system. So that is another area that has to be given immediate attention as a policy consultant. And that work is a low-hanging fruit. You don't have to go far for that. We could deal with that almost instantly. But it will certainly help those of us in the private sector. For example, in my business, I have a huge roof. I want to become an IPP, an independent power producer, as well as deal with my own costs of energy. But at the same time, we need to understand the rules and the regulations and how it's going to affect my investments. So until then, I am not going to make the investment that I need. So we have some work to do in those areas. And I think the quicker we get there, the easier it is for a country like ours that have sun almost 365 days of the year to maximize the use of our solar through heating systems as well as electricity generation. So I think there is quite a lot that we can do, and in terms of transport as well.
And gentlemen, before we get to the next segment, managing this current economic crisis as it is challenging. We're talking about loss of revenue on government, and we're talking about the impact that it has on business, but fundamentally we're talking about how that is impacting the regular consumer, who already does not have a lot of disposable income to work with. Now we have the prospect of a recession that economists, a number of financial organizations are predicting. And if I may quote from the Forbes magazine, I'm going to try and share that article. And this article was published, I believe, at the end of August. But what they're saying is that many economists are expecting economic growth to slow in 2023. But they can't agree on whether we'll enter an official recession or not. Some analysts estimate economic growth in 2023 for developing economies will be slightly positive at 0.1%, while others are predicting a growth rate of negative 0.04%. Investors can still make money in a recession, but it's more difficult. Standard only, long only trades can be hit or miss, which is why we offer sophisticated, of course, they're talking about trading here. But I'm saying all of this to say that the last time the international community experienced a global financial crisis was back in 2008. And we saw the impact that that had on Grenada. How prepared are we, do you believe, for us to confront another global financial crisis as what we experience? Obviously, the contours of this particular looming crisis might be different because there are certain safeguards in place. But what are you predicting might happen in the context of Grenada if that were to happen? And how can we better prepare ourselves if and when it does come? Dr. Flesh, I will start with you on that question and then go to Mr. Diali.
Yeah, great question, Dr. Bubb, and nice context. I think it was in May, Dr. Bubb, or very early June, I appeared on a panel to discuss the upcoming elections then, or just past elections. And one of the points I made was that the second half of 2022 and in the future, 2023 and so, there are going to be some heavy headwinds that the local economy will have to address. And the then Ukraine conflict had just started, escalated to a full-out war now, and other things. We are going to see the effect of that. This morning, I started off by making the point, laying the foundation point, that we are fundamentally an import island economy. We are susceptible, we are very vulnerable to exogenous shocks and influences. And therefore, we are likely to face, once the recession steps in and so on, the consequences of that we are likely to in fact face. And the consequences of we will have to pay the price for it. However, there are a couple of things. Only this morning, I was researching the future oil prices, and it is assumed that during recessions that you're likely to see reduction in fuel prices as much as between 30 to 40%. So if that holds, right, one of the consequences could very well be that we are likely to see a downward pressure on fuel imports and have through the supply chain network, we're going to feel the consequences of that. That's one thing. On the other hand, because the country fundamentally remains, our economy fundamentally has not changed, it means we are still vulnerable to these external shocks. The extent to which, for example, and not just the crisis, Dr. Bubb, of 2008, but COVID has also brought home to us in a very forceful way some lessons that we ought to have learned. Probably we learned, but not implemented yet in terms of the change that is expected. But we got to look at how we can reorder, how we can re-engineer our economies, both locally, but also from a regional perspective. CARICOM, how can we bring CARICOM into production, the actual production space? Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, and so on for food production. Grenada as well. How can we begin the process of replanting, of getting back to agriculture in a fundamental way, and not just the primary aspect, but the agro processing, so that we can produce things, can stuff, bottle stuff, and have it in stock for tough times in particular. So we need to reorder. I don't think that the economy has shielded itself properly. We are not insulated from the external shocks that we are likely to see, and we are seeing it already vis-a-vis prices. And the manufacturers are going to feel it. The supermarkets are going to feel it, and consumers are certainly going to feel it. But it's an opportunity again for us to relook our consumption patterns, for citizens to learn, for the Food and Nutrition Council, for example, to become much more proactive. The Ministry of Agriculture, the external division, right, of that ministry. So we need a comprehensive program in place to move this economy very rapidly to the change position, to a transformation position where we can see genuine change, and therefore with the ability to withstand the external shocks.
Mr. Diali?
Well, Dr. Fletcher
Recession.
is a greater economist than me, and he knows the definition of recession in terms of GDP, lack of GDP growth, and so on, the theoretical thing. But I want to give a few thoughts on diversification of the economy, and I agree, Dr. Fletcher, on the positive impact of fuel prices that a recession will tend to have, because it tends to decrease it, and what the predictions are. But I want to take a few areas of our economy and highlight and think that those are areas we can bolster and reinforce to deal with recessionary effects. The first is the CIP program. Citizen by Investment program, I believe, is a significant program for the country that brings in revenues that we need to look at carefully and restructure the Citizen by Investment program to meet the issue of attracting people that we invite as potential citizens through that program to come as investors as well and target sections of our economy, as he indicated, agro-processing, and give them the aspects that the CIP brings into the country to invest in those areas of agro-processing and entertain the right people there. Citizen by Investment program also needs to be restructured. It must be moved as a government department and become a statutorized organization. I think once we do that, I know the challenges we face internationally with Citizen by Investment programs, but I also believe that is a significant thing for us in transforming our economy from our traditional dependencies on tourism and agriculture and so on. The other area I quickly want to talk about is remittances. It is a big thing for small island developing states. The good thing about the predictions of those recessions in those economies that Dr. Bubb spoke about is that unemployment doesn't seem to be climbing. As a matter of fact, those economies are still showing strong employment figures. So it means that our peoples in those economies that are continuing to be employed can also continue to remit monies to our peoples here, and it will help in terms of disposable income and what happens. And probably we could get that more formalized through our diaspora desks and so on. The other area is the services industry, and I speak particularly of SGU and what happens. That is a strong sector of our economy that continues to be very strong. SGU is projecting high student intake for the 22-23 year. And as you know, Dr. Bubb and Dr. Fletcher, these students, when they come in, swells our economy by 5,000, whatever the figure is. And these are constant spend in our economy that boosts the economic activity, whether it's through rentals, whether it's through other services.
The real estate, we're talking, the retail, restaurants,
Correct. And it represents 20-25% of our GDP. So it's an area that we need to put focus on and see how we can strengthen where we can. And finally, I want to compliment this government on the construction sector, because I think the construction sector has traditionally been used as a short-term measure to ensure economic activity continues. And with every change of government, there is this constant thing to investigate for corruption and check contracts and so on. I'm seeing this new government, and pleasingly so, continue a lot of the projects of the last government and not stalling them. And I think that augurs well in terms of keeping economic activity right down to the grassroots. Because remember, construction activity attracts every individual from every level, and they participate in a productive way so that they could keep getting monies in their pocket to support themselves and their families. So this is something that we also need to continue to encourage. And as a recession approaches in some way and some effect, and we get effects from those huge countries, I think we can look internally at those sectors and see how we can bolster them and reinforce so that our people don't face dire hardships in terms of loss of jobs and companies closing because there isn't activity enough to support and so on, which in my view tends to be one of the immediate effects of these things, and whether they lose their jobs and they can't remit money and what is happening and our social programs here take a hit. So I believe that is one of the areas or some of the areas that we could look at, Dr. Bubb, to help with the pending situation we see with a worldwide recession as being predicted.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, this was yet another informative. I feel every week I am back in business school. I am back learning economics again, economics 101 in my days being taught by Mr. Frederick, the late Mr. Frederick at the T.M. Marshall Community College, micro and macroeconomics, because this is what we're really dealing with, right? We're talking about that delicate dance between scarce resources and having to then fulfill the needs of the population with those scarce resources, and for the population to be able to economize and manage manage having to feed their families with those scarce resources. So this was a very important conversation this morning. Gentlemen, I do want to give you the opportunity for some closing comments before we get to the media panel, and then we move on to wrap up the program. But Dr. Fletcher, I want to begin with you.
Okay, well, again, let me end where I began by thanking you for inviting me to be part of this morning's program. Thank your viewers, listeners, Mr. Diali, for being part of the panel, and for viewers for being part of that discussion. I think it is what we discussed here this morning was very important, very useful. We probably need to find ways of where we can capture some of that useful information and see how it can be applied in public policy. There are some low-hanging fruits, I believe, that still exist that government, public policy need to look at. And some of it is being looked at. There are some welcome signs from the government, some good initiatives to add to what Mr. Diali has pointed out in terms of the construction industry. That is going to be a big guardrail. It will be a big guardrail for the country in terms of any looming recession. Other sectors that we need to look at, the blue economy, yachting, and so on, because in most recessions, really, the persons that are high income earners or high assets owners, they are able to travel and move around the world. If we can continue to attract some of those through the yachting area, through diving, through film making, and so on, I think it can help to really guard against some of the negative consequences that we see to follow. Grenlec, to summarize, we need to save that industry, in fact, that company. But we need to expand the energy sector, and to do so rapidly while safeguarding the fossil fuel aspect to it. They need to get back into a financially strong position so that they can look after their business. At the fuel pumps, consumers take advantage of that price decrease. But let us also, in doing that, let us become wiser consumers and understand whereas we're saving on the fuel at the pump, that extra $2 or $3 need to be managed carefully of how we're going to spend it on food items. So let us not get carried away with that decrease that we're experiencing today, but become economic with our spending and so on. So once again, Kelon, thank you very much, and thank your listeners, your viewers, and Mr. Diali for being a good panelist, co-panelist.
Absolutely, and you speak about yachting. I'm not too sure why yachting is not on the curriculum of schools. Yachting is a $1 trillion industry that I believe local Grenadians are not taking advantage of, simply because we don't have the capacity to take advantage of the yachting industry. So may I suggest, Dr. Fletcher, perhaps in the next budgetary consultation, the budgetary consultation should be on, that yachting becomes a subject, right? And we hear talk about subjects, not certifications or things like that, that yachting becomes something that is a life skill that can be transferable for our citizens, that can become an economic earner for the citizens of the country. Just a thought.
Yeah, but no, if I may just respond quickly.
I'm no development expert, but
no, just for 30 seconds, Kelon. In fact, this government has announced a subsector called the blue economy. That is going to be an area of focus going forward. And that's where the yachting, the diving, maneuvering, and so got to be involved. A paper is now being put together to look at this. And critical is not just the appearance of the yachts on our shows and the fees that they pay that are going to be useful, but the multiple skill sets that are required is amazing.
Like that. Yes,
and
absolutely.
A lot of our young people can find high value jobs working in that area. So it's represent another opening, another subsector where we can really make a difference, not just in income earning, but in providing our people with the skill sets, with additional skill sets that can be used not just in yachting, because if you become a good welder, or underwater welder, you can work for probably Grenlec, you can do your own welding, host of things we can do. So thanks for that encouragement, Dr. Bubb.
Absolutely. Mr. Diali.
Thank you, Dr. Bubb. And I will just say on the yachting, extended to mean maritime services, which will capture captaincy, fine skills in carpentry and engine maintenance and so on. And we're on the same page with that. Just to say to Dr. Fletcher that we've been talking for this for quite a while, so we need to get some action. So I would say that this is an action issue and not an issue to talk more about, because there's a lot of that has been done in that area. Finally, Dr. Bubb, my closing comments is we need to take a look in the mirror. Look in the mirror and ask ourselves what as individuals we can do to help our country, our lovely country of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, because at the end of the day, inflation is not a government's problem. It is all of us problem, and increasing prices is all of us issue for all of us. And we need to look inwardly and find out what we can do differently so that we can deal with the issue of inflationary increases. How can we change what we do when we're in good times and now we're facing challenging times, and whether we can do this differently? As Dr. Fletcher was saying, you have a reduction in price in fuel. That doesn't mean if we used to travel once or 5 times a week to check out our friends, we're going to do it 10 times now. We need to look at our habits and what we do and how we can do it, and see how we can help our country deal with these issues that we're facing, and ourselves, interestingly, deal with it and manage it going forward, especially those of us who have kids and have children and families to manage and make sure their lives stay as uncomplicated as possible in these difficult times. So thank you very much for being part of the program again.
Absolutely, Mr. Diali, you come with a wealth of real-world experience that we would always continue to rely on. In this case, Dr. Fletcher brought the theory, you brought the practice. Dr. Fletcher also brought the practice because he's a practitioner as well. So we thank you, gentlemen, for your participation on the program.
Thank you.
Viewers and listeners, that was Mr. Christopher Diali and Dr. Stephen Fletcher speaking on the socioeconomic issues now confronting Grenada as we experience multiple economic crises that are affecting working people, especially hard. And for the next segment, we'll take a quick break, and then I'll be bringing on here 2 colleagues, Mr. Gerard Joseph, if you can turn your camera on, and Callistra Faria. Lady and gentlemen, we want to welcome you to the program. We'll have a quick conversation here on some of the big stories that media has been covering in Grenada. But Gerard Joseph, you made the news this week with respect to some concerns raised around the post-cabinet press briefing. So we're also going to have a conversation about that. And so, lady and gentlemen, we want to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are?
To the cards that I have drawn that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. The unions are not threatening to withdraw their labor, and neither are they threatening to shut the country down, as you did.
I think your summarization of my position is highly inaccurate, and may I dare say a bit inflammatory.
The strategy did not work the last time for you. So what would make this?
Well, you're assuming that we're doing the same strategy.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to the final segment of the Bubb Report. I'm now joined by Mr. Gerard Joseph, who is the president of the Media Workers Association of Grenada, and Ms. Callistra Faria, who is the host of The Narrative, WPG10's The Narrative, which airs 6 p.m. weekly on WPG10 in Grenada. Also, you can catch the repeat segments on YouTube. But Mr. Joseph, I want to begin with you. Let's get to the meat of the matter, shall we? You've expressed concerns with respect to the quality of the post-cabinet press briefings. In fact, the editor of the New Today is very friendly to the new administration. He's not he's not as adversarial with the NDC as he was with the NNP, but he also seems to be echoing your concern with respect to what happens at the press briefings in terms of question allocation. Talk to us about the concerns of journalists who attend those press briefings there.
Well, Kellan, thank you for having me. Well, the concerns that were received initially was the kind of control that is being put on by the new administration, really, or seemingly put on in terms of hosting of the post-cabinet briefings, and they said it was an if they have something, they would have a post-cab rather than a weekly post-cabinet where we could get different ministers to be interviewed on different subject areas. So a lot of media colleagues would have voiced their concerns, citing that it kind of goes away from the level of democracy that was witnessed previously and the kind of tradition that has been we have gone accustomed to in terms of the weekly post-cabinet briefings, and it comes across to some as a kind of leverage on media controlling what goes out rather than being able to just get the information as it comes, or having the ministers or different department heads available to speak to the media weekly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now let me. I'm going to quote what Mr. Worm, George Worm of the New Today, and then I'm going to bring in Callistra Farrier here. And this is the editorial from this week, last week on the 16th of September. Quoting now, he says, the current occupants of the ministerial complex at the Botanical Gardens should do nothing to give the nation the impression that the number one priority when it comes to facing the media and their questions is solely about controlling the narrative and to engage in the spin doctor approach at all times. This was not the case during the campaign when the political leader and now Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell was able to impress the Grenadian electorate at those town hall meetings as being ready for prime time with the manner in which he dealt with all of the questions thrown at him. He goes on to say further, this played a tremendous part in setting him up for the job of Prime Minister of the country from the veteran and aging leader, Dr. Keith Mitchell, who was seemingly afraid to expose himself to questions and also public scrutiny. Mr. Joseph, now I would put you in the hot seat here. Now, some may say that you're just saying that there was a level of democracy before the National Democratic Congress with respect to how media was treated. Is that an accurate description of what the media climate was in Grenada before this last election?
As I was alluding to, it was a more democratic. I didn't say that it was better.
Okay.
It wasn't better. I would say that it was not better. There was still a level of control, especially with the onset of COVID, and using via Zoom. If you've been with postcab, they have a more level of control that rather than when you're face to face. We could ask more verbal questions, and people could listen and watch you, and you're able to ask a second question or follow up accordingly. So that level of control started with the previous administration. We saw some concerning trends at postcab with the previous administration as well. However, it has escalated really with how it's going on now. And I also see that it's very concerning, and but I'm saddened by how this came out with an editorial. We were trying to reach out to the administration to try to rectify, to try to understand, clarify, better get a grasp of it. But this article now shows the whole situation into a worse spin, and now we have to try to get some sort of control and try to get some kind of clarity. But again, too, the government, it works kind of twofold, because now the government also already has concerns on the table through the article. However, it puts us in a kind of a tailspin in terms of how do we go from here.
Mm-hmm. Let me bring in Callistra. Callistra, welcome back to the report. We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago about what is happening at the ministerial complex. And now everybody know I am generally not fans of press secretaries, because I think they take their gatekeeping responsibilities, their fiduciary gatekeeping responsibilities too far, that they get some power and they think that suddenly they are greater than the ministers who were elected by the people. And to my mind, that ought not to be the case. But let's get your thoughts on the concerns that Mr. Joseph has raised here. If you can unmute your mic there, Kalistra.
Got it. Sorry. Kalan, thank you so much for having me on the Bubb Report once again. I'm happy to be here. The issue of media, we had a set of challenges in the last administration. I think I may have been the poster girl for those challenges. I anticipated that given the tone of the campaign, the last campaign coming from the NDC side, that there might have been a marked difference. And there are differences, but they're not differences that are designed to improve the landscape and to create a more accommodating space for journalists, really. There's the pretense that we're going to get along, but certain actions tells you differently. For instance, I was not too broken up about post-cabinet briefings being ended, really, because there was not much, as Gerald was saying, the control back then. The press secretary Philomena Robertson was like a field marshal, and so there was. I figured, I would be able to reach ministers one-on-one, get permission because of public service rules, get access to senior public officers who are the ones who really hold the information on how government works and so on. But that is not happening. This government is about to head into 100 days soon, at the end of this month. And so far, no ministers have made themselves available, despite formal invitations and multiple invitations have made themselves available for interviews. Permanent secretaries that I have contacted have said, well, you have to check the minister, but you either can't reach the ministers or they give you the runaround, really. And that's not really a good sign.
Or they tell you, well, we do not have all of the facts on the matter, but then would appear on a party platform
I was just about to say that while I am not getting the Attorney General, whom I have many questions for, or the Minister of Agriculture, or the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Carriacou and Pidi Martinique Affairs, those are some of the ministers that I have directly given invitations to, and also sent a note to the press secretary saying that I would like to interview these people, and she says, fine, go ahead. I was trying to be a good girl there, so I sent a note to her as well. And that it is, that go ahead, but it hasn't happened. It is going to be 100 days soon, and none of them have come on. But in the meantime, they have appeared on Heartbeat Radio, they've appeared on Vibes FM, and there's no question about where Vibes FM leans in Carriacou. And of course, saying some very inflammatory things that ministers ought not to say. And they're thinking, you know what, if you're going to say
making declarations of people who would go to jail.
Would go to jail, the judge.
That's not for a government minister to decide.
There.
Yeah.
Or the Attorney General, who's also the Minister of Labor, talking about making pronouncements on the personnel issues that came up with Carriacou. It's going to get to her desk at some point, either as the Minister of Labor or as the Attorney General representing the state in whatever action the union may take if it gets there. But she's investigating and figuring out and has come up with the conclusion that everything was above board. So what happens when it comes to you to deal with in your capacity, either as the Minister of Labor in conciliation or in arbitration? I always mix the two up. Or in court as the state's legal representative. So they're there on political platforms talking, or else sending out a news release like a day after you sent them questions or queries, a news release a day after, blowing your exclusive out of the water because no one else knew about it and you wanted an exclusive, but you gave them the courtesy of reaching out, and they put it all out there in a news release by way of response rather than having the courtesy to respond to you as a media person, while the day before making it seem as if they could not or would not respond. So, and I'm thinking, you know what, if you're going to be saying all of those inflammatory things on other platforms, why don't you come on the narrative and say it? Hello.
Or come on the Bubb
I don't
Report and
mind
say it.
you know what? But so I am very uncomfortable with what I'm seeing now. And there's also the issue of the way the post-cabinet briefings are now being conducted. It doesn't seem as if the post-cabinet briefings are based on whether there's something to say or not. It seems to be based on whether or not the Prime Minister is in the state. The Prime Minister presides over these news conferences, answers every question, even after his ministers have answered it. And obviously, I'm not sure who's advising him, but that does not look good for them. It just looks as if he has no confidence in his people and his people are incompetent. And he probably needs to watch that, but that is their issue. I don't do PR for the NDC. It's not my business to save the NDC administration from themselves. Not that I think I could in the first place. But so the control, you can see the control there. And what makes it particularly dangerous is while, for instance, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Mitchell had not given me an interview in years. In fact, the last message I got back from him was, every time I do an interview with you, somebody sues me. So I am a bit shy.
He seems to like the word sue, huh? But I digress.
You know, but you know, it's nice that he's on the other end of a lawsuit. But he seems to think that when I do interviews with him, he says things that causes people to sue him. I don't know why that is my fault. But that so this is one of the excuses that he sent back. Obviously, you know, so he hadn't given me interviews for years. But so I'm asking myself now, what is different? I'm not seeing a difference, particularly with the way that the media is being engaged. And then you've got a press secretary who limits questions. No, I appreciate that the government is trying to have some continuity in the governance of the country. That is absolutely important. And it's one of the things that I was worried about when the administration changed, that there would be, everybody would want to start from the beginning, and we would waste another 5 years. But that's not happening. A lot of things are continuing, you know, and that's great. I heard one of your earlier guests saying that, I think former Senator Diali saying that he's seeing continuity in a particular area, construction, I think. And that's good. But what I have a difficulty with is the continuation in the conduct of the post-cabinet briefings, where people speak for a whole length of time. You have a whole panel, 4 people, 5 people, 3 people speaking. Everybody has something gets a chance to say something. And then whatever time is left is grudgingly given to the media. And you're limited to your questions. You know, I asked one question recently, and the press secretary promptly, I mean, I was like, is it Philo in the seat? But then I looked and the hairstyle was different. Promptly moved on to the other people. And I wondered why, you know, that really doesn't make any sense. When you open yourself up to scrutiny by the media and you can give an account of yourself and you have the answers that are needed, then it makes you stronger rather than appearing to cut media people off or not being available for media people. And so I hope that MWAG has recognized that the situation is a red flag one, and considering engaging the government. And I think that is important. It is unfortunate that the minutes of our meeting got exposed and ended up in the public domain. Obviously, I understand the mistakes that were made there that caused that to happen, and I know President is working on ensuring that doesn't happen again. But so our approach to government has been put out there, but I don't think that it damages in any way our ability to engage government on all of those issues, because the situation is the situation, and really there is it's not a secret really. This is what MWAG does. We're a press freedom advocacy group.
And let us, you know, be clear about this. And I want us to be consistent about this. When the previous administration, at least when I started the Bubb Report, there were some ministers who in the new National Party administration who deliberately, I would say deliberately, avoided coming on the Bubb Report. That happened. I'm saying I'm hoping that this would not be the case with the new administration, because the same standard by which I held government ministers, and some government ministers at least, because some of them did actually appear, the same standard by which I held them to account is the same standard with which I would hold this current administration to account with respect to non-appearance. And I believe those of us who have been consistent with respect to holding power to account ought to continue to be consistent in that way. But Mr. Joseph, I believe one of the issues that the public has raised is that suddenly the Media Association has found its voice with the new administration. Have you heard that talking point, and how do you respond to that claim that certainly you have the courage to hold this government's feet to the fire when you actually did not have the courage to do the same for the previous administration? Your thoughts on that school of thought?
Well, in that regard, I would withhold some of my comments because it comes across because my executive took up office in the late 2021, November to be exact, and we were putting in our structures to enable rebirth really for MWAG members. There was a disparity between membership and the association, and we've been trying to encourage members to come back in to the fold to strengthen the association. So at that time, the focus was not on response to government or to response to some of the issues, because we had internal issues and we still have some internal issues to deal with. Our last general council, we decided, I brought it to the executive first, and we brought it to the general council to share some of the workloads, because an executive of an association can never run an association at that magnitude, a national association by itself. So that we decided to share the workload and form committees to run some of the operations of the media fraternity, because as you would realize, people don't realize that we don't have an 8 to 4 job. We don't have a 9 to 5. It goes beyond.
Or Monday to Friday, we work every day, all day.
Exactly. So you have to factor in that these executives over the years would have to factor in their jobs first before sometimes even the work of MWAG. We don't get a stipend. It's something you do pro bono for the benefit of the association, and then you would have varying factors that would hinder smooth operations. However, we've been trying our best to change that status quo, and such you would see more responses from MWAG, especially under my stewardship, and to set that fire again for MWAG, for media in Grenada, and I would take this time to encourage media personnel to get on board because training would be forthcoming, and you'd see a stronger association to represent yourselves. And remember, MWAG is not the executive. MWAG is not Gerard Joseph. It's not Kalistra Farre. It's not any of the executive members or any other normal members. It is the entire fraternity. And if we cannot stand up for ourselves and stand in unity, then we would all fall asunder. So in that regard, you would see a stronger approach. And one of the issues I would highlight, Kellan, is that I believe the transition between executives, something was missing, and I immediately realized that on my assuming leadership of the association, in terms of that advocacy level, what you need to do as president or what you need to do as an executive was not passed on. So the former presidents such as Royal Titus, Michael Bascom, and the others, through that the fever you have gotten from them in terms of advocacy has not been transitioned over the years. Upon my assuming leadership, also I appealed to the veteran members, because I realized that there was a level of disparity, and younger members felt that instead of the veterans being assistive, they were more condemning younger members. But they have to realize the whole media landscape has changed. How media is done is not the same. So I appealed to the veterans to come on board to try to close that gap. So yes, you would be seeing more advocacy rather than a passive approach sometimes to issues.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. And Mr. Joseph, I have pledged my support. On several occasions, I've volunteered my time and support, not under your stewardship, but under the stewardship of other media workers in Grenada. And it was rebuffed. They declined the opportunities that I was offering to, because I believe firmly in giving back, but they ignored me. So I just thought I would put that out there as well. So if you do need any kind of support from me, I am a very humble person. I don't pretend to be a know-it-all. I love giving back. I love imparting knowledge. That's what I do every day. And you can rely on my services as well, pro bono, to support the media fraternity in Grenada, because I do long for a time when we can get back to the media that I grew up in under the stewardship of greats like Leslie Pear, the late Leslie Pear, the late George Grant, Alistair Hughes, Paul Roberts, all of these guys. We do need to get back to that place. So Kalistra, we really have to get to the end of the program. So we were supposed to talk about various stories, but these two issues really took up a lot of oxygen in the room. So Kalistra, over to you for some closing comments.
Well, certainly I'm happy to see that the MWAG, the executive, is now reaching out to the veterans, as they like to refer to them, to assist the attack on press freedom is very subtle right now. They've got much more finesse in blowing us off, and so engagement and strong engagement is important. One of the things that MWAG did was to restrict who could be on, we changed the constitution to restrict who could be on the executive. And so I think one of the problems that we had before, when we had big issues to deal with, was that you had people who worked with the government. For instance, at the time when Winston Garraway pushed me down, and that epic situation with that photograph that went viral, the president was his employee. She was in a difficult position. And so we've changed that, and the people on the executive are more independent in terms of who they work for. They don't work for government, and you find that usually, press freedom is threatened by corporate and all of that as well. But it's usually the government that we end up in difficulties with. And so now it's going to be easier for them to engage without people worrying about offending their bosses when they have to stand up and do the advocacy work that MWAG was created to do. So, I'm happy with the direction the association is taking right now, focusing on training and focusing on representing their members better. So I just, want to say congratulations to the young ones for moving in that direction. And of course, people like me and you, Kellen, are always available. I did offer my services. I was right here. Don't feel bad, because I was right here and offered my services to MWAG, and I was.
And you were treated in some quarters as a pariah. What do Kalistra? She thinks she playing? Where she come out?
Well,
I had to get colloquial.
It's a Grenadian thing, and people in all various circles who might be considered by others to know something about something sometimes tend to get that sort of pushback. So I get it. It doesn't worry me. But hopefully they will embrace what's available and what's out there now. And we need the members to be part of the association. We need members to engage. This is one of the things that MWAG, when we founded MWAG all those years ago, because as you may recall, Kellen, I'm a founding member of the Media Workers Association, and past executive member on multiple executives. That we had members involved. People were involved really, and we were going to war with usually the NNP administration on the regular.
We
And
led
we
several walkouts against the NNP in previous post-cabinet press briefings. Mr. Joseph would not know about this. I'm aging myself here. But I remember, I'm not wanting to go on a soapbox, but I remember myself, yourself, I believe it was Royal Titus at the time, Michael Bascom, several of us walked out on the Prime Minister of Grenada at the time, Dr. Keith Mitchell, over his treatment of certain journalists in the country at the time. And I would do that again without regard to who is in power. That was the kind of militance that we had at the time. And perhaps it was because I was trained by the great Leslie Pay and George Grant that I have that courage, and yourself as well. So, but please proceed. I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
I think then, Kellan, we understood our place and our power. You know, I'm dying for a good walkout. I haven't had one of those in a long time. And there have been many instances when there should have been a walkout, and there wasn't. But I think because we had a stronger sense of our role, there's a level of timidity right now among media people that they actually believe that they stand one tier lower than the politician, which is absolutely not the case with the fourth estate, and that does not come lightly. Of course, it comes with great responsibility. It's not a blank check to do whatever you want, and some of us have certainly broken a lot of rules as we went along. But you know, the media is not to be trifled with. We're part of the system, and an important part of the system. And what we have to begin to do again is to get our members, the new people who came into the profession in the last 5-10 years or so, who did not have the benefit of that militant time that you speak of, Kellan, that we can reintroduce them. We can introduce them to what it is and what it means to be a member of the media and the responsibilities that we hold as members of the media. And I just want to say here on the program to the MPs and the executive, you know, give us some interviews, because the story gets told whether you make yourself available or not. You're not killing a story by not coming on or whatever. All that happens, as you know, Kellan, is that your side just doesn't get told. I think people have the misconception that in order to be fair and balanced, you have to wait on the other side to say something.
And that's not the case.
You know, the responsibility doesn't extend that far. You cannot kill my story by remaining silent, because then what's the point of the media then if the story doesn't get told because the other guy doesn't want to give his style of the story? It is about proper investigation, verification, 2 resources to verify your information. Once information is verified, the other guy can take his sweet time responding, or he can be, you know, trying to play catch up after you publish your story.
Absolutely. Given the popularities, Tessa is saying, given the popularity of social media and so much citizen journalism, would a walkout be as effective? What are your thoughts? That's a very good point there. But the idea of citizen journalism, usually whenever I hear the term citizen journalism, I'm putting on my academician's hat now. To what extent do these citizen journalists follow the principles of journalism? Of treating to stories, of making sure that all of the facts are properly verified, that you get all of the information from both sides of the story. It's about treating to stories. And I believe that is what makes an institutional journalist different from a citizen journalist. A citizen journalist does not care about verification and verifying the facts. All they care about, to my mind, tends to be sensationalism, tends to be on how many likes and how many views they can get, tends to be on just the salacious nature of stories. There are some of us who still take care to ensure that our reporting is responsible. So that is a very interesting perspective, Tessa, that you bring. And that is something, of course, I think we can talk about. Kalistra, you wanted to comment on this?
I mean, when I think of citizen journalism, and when I look at what I see on social media, I think slander, irresponsibility, and all of that. It is you know, this thing about citizen journalism, even the phrase doesn't make sense really to me. But we cannot switch out the journalist for the guy with a smartphone. If we do that, it is a situation for chaos. All right, I have seen some people who should not even have a smartphone, much less to have the the sacred responsibility of bringing information to the public. The way information is treated and handled to be brought to the public is a particular skill set that you may be lucky and everything that you heard happens to be actual and you put it out there. But what happens when everything you heard is not and you haven't verified? You've just thrown it up there because well, I got something hot. This is not a standard by which I publish. Oh, I got something hot. The standard by which I publish is it verified? Is it verifiable? Is it factual? Is it truthful? And
absolutely
standards.
And especially in the context, correct, especially in the context of the Caribbean, you can also be liable to lawsuits. But we're almost out of time, Mr. Joseph. I want to give you some opportunities. Thank you so much for Kalisha for your appearance on the program today. And Mr. Joseph, I want to give you some opportunities for some closing comments.
Okay, Kellan. I would also like to comment on the social media point of view. Would our workout be just as effective? I think it would even be more effective now in the light of social media, because at that time it would be more impactful. So I believe it would be more credible than having a citizen journalist report on something that would have happened rather than you seeing it from a journalistic, professionalistic point of view. So and I was also reading some of the comments in terms of journalism. A lot of people don't understand, and they don't understand the dynamics. Okay, they could speak it, they could speak about it, but can they actually do it? And can they actually work in the different media houses which have different policies? People don't understand until you experience it yourself, what it is like and how the whole landscape has changed. As I was highlighting, and on the whole entire issues, the whole changes, that transition between those who are more knowledgeable on what journalism is, how you do it and how you go about it. That level of sharing did not happen, and it has weakened the association, because I became a journalist since 2013, and I did not become a member until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So that speaks to the levels, that process of not being welcomed into the whole media fraternity, and it has put the association at at the edge of a precipice, really, Kellan, because right now, do you see, or do I see someone, a young person, willing to take on that role as a journalist? The work, the workload, most
the
of
pay,
my peers would, exactly.
The management.
Exactly. I'm coming to that. The pay, the workload. Most of my peers are complaining of being burnt out. They want, most of them are wanting to get out. If these so-called young journalists, in terms of young, I stress the on the word young or youth, if they leave, what would happen? Would the citizen journalists be able to really do the work? And people are speaking about the ABCs of journalism. Do you understand? Working towards a deadline every day. TV, newspaper, radio journalism is and each of them are different. And yes, people you would be working to your A's and your Q's. However, you have to remember you report to an editor. It is not you. Sometimes you could speak out, but you have to report to the editor. If the editor wants that story and the editor tells you, okay, you go with that, you have to go with it. And that's it.
Or the manager, or the manager of the TV station, who sometimes get a call from a member of the board of directors of the TV station. I'm not referencing your TV station by any measure, or talking about the management dynamics there, or am I really? But I remember during my time working at your network under a different management structure, when members of the board of directors would call the newsroom, call the news director, call the manager of the station, and tell them to pull certain stories that was not amenable or not favorable towards the administration in power at the time. I have that personal experience, so I do know of those internal pressures that the public doesn't necessarily see as well. But please proceed, Jared.
Yes. So right now, as I was highlighting the different challenges that we are facing. So I would just like to again encourage members, media members, and it's not only media is not only elusive to the journalists, reporters for TV, radio, camera persons, the different persons in administration at the different media entities. You are a media worker. So it's not only journalism, it's not only the writers. So it takes in the DJs, the announcers, everybody. We are welcoming everybody on board because we need you to pivot and take and transition this association, the media fraternity, forward. Otherwise, in the long run, in the next 5 to 10 years, we might just not be in existence. And I believe a Grenada without a food estate or a media fraternity in Grenada does not bode well for democracy. We have rekindled media awards, which will be coming this year, as well as Media Week. I'm encouraging members to submit your reports. We're doing it from 2020 because we haven't had a media award since 2017. I believe each member of the media should be awarded. However, it's just select a few of categories. The work, the stresses we would have gone through the pandemic, every member should be commended. If it was up to me, I would award each and every member because people don't understand what the workers at GIS, MTV, GBN, the New Today or the Grenadian Informer, all the different entities would have gone through under that pandemic. We have had to face the brunt of the pandemic as frontline workers. I believe and a pay cuts and a loss of jobs. So I believe each and every media worker should be awarded if that was possible. However, we're moving forward with media awards for the 10th of December and Media Week from the 14th to the 20th. And the matter of training, we have a training committee now established. So it is led by Ms. Kalisha Fari. So I would welcome you as well. I would welcome your involvement, Kellan, in terms of your willingness to serve the association.
I would be more than happy to
fraternity.
serve. Yes,
exactly,
absolutely.
and take media back to where it was, or even stronger than it was. I
Absolutely.
think that's about it for me.
Absolutely, Mr. Joseph. Thank you so very much. I know it's Sunday. You work with GBN, so on Sundays I would always go out with Levi Benoit. May his soul rest in peace, the late Levi Benoit, cameraman, to do the country assignments, the rural assignments in Grenada. So thank you again, Mr. Joseph, for your appearance on the Bubb Report, and of course, Kalisha Faria before you.
All right, thank you.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you for your participation on this week's episode of the Bubb Report. Some very, very interesting perspectives that were raised by all of the panelists, all of the guests who appeared. We wish to thank them for their valuable contributions this week. On behalf of our hardworking producers of the program, I'm your humble servant, Dr. Kellan Bubb, wishing everyone a safe and productive week. Bye-bye.